they were like what they are now, they were like looking for players to sponsor, and I remember signing up for their thing, but just not really following through with it.
I gotcha.
But so I went down there uh for to play Legacy at their it was like a
Based.
5K Legacy event, and the judge that I went there with, he was in L2 there, and when we came back to the hotel or the Airbnb, he gave me a standing up 2.5 hour long impromptu lecture about
Oh
40K
God.
lore.
Dude, it
And
is the autist dream in terms of how much fucking lore there is just to get started. Like, holy shit, I believe it.
but he was really good. He's actually the VP of digital outreach for PETA. So this man knows
Huh.
how to like capture the attention and like spin a yarn for real.
Oh, for sure. It did. Ask him how he feels about the Space Wolves because that is one of my favorite little bits of news about that whole thing. Do you know about that?
I don't know anything about that. Oh
So the Space Wolves are a faction of Space Marines that like wear fur. They're very you know the companions from Skyrim?
no, I
Oh,
I I played a ton of Oblivion and Morrowind so much
okay.
that like when Skyrim came out, I was like, I've already done this. I can't do it
Like
anymore.
the fight, like imagine like the Fighters Guild where they're very like, oh, haha, we do missions and we drink heartily and we laugh and we sing songs and we wear furs, but like in power armor. Like we're talking a faction of Space Marines that like because Space Marines biologically can't get drunk, like their organs filter out the toxins too well,
Yeah,
and so
their
these dudes
metabolism's too good,
in
right?
yeah, so these dudes invented something that's literally like poison. That's what they drink to get drunk. Like it's a toxin that shuts off those organs so they can actually get drunk. Like they're literally the Viking like Space Marine
Mm,
chapter.
I get it.
Um but PETA for the fur thing got a little upsetty at them and Games Workshop replied, "Well, don't worry because all of the fur on the Space Wolves is made of plastic," which I thought was very funny.
He's a super reasonable guy. I don't think he gives a shit about imaginary animals. Like I don't either.
No, no, but like I just that's whenever PETA and Games Workshop comes up, that's a funny little anecdote. But anyways, yeah, no, it is definitely it is a lot of lore. That's what,
Like it's an mind-numbing amount of lore. And then
there's
he
like
also
400 books.
yeah, the other guy we were with too already like was familiar with Warhammer, so like it's just me that's learning stuff, and I'm just like I didn't even ask for this, you guys. Like I'm sick as a dog. Like I COVID tested myself like 5 times because I was sure I must have COVID. I was that sick. But I'm not gonna.
This was recently then.
It was yeah, it was like 2021.
Oh, okay,
It
sure.
was my first time like leaving the state since well before COVID. So like I'm like I already got the time off of work. I got PTO. I'm going to play fucking Legacy. I don't give a shit. I borrowed everything I didn't have. I have a $6,000 deck. I'm ready to
What
go.
were you playing?
I was playing the super
2021.
obnoxious blue white. It was like uh 8 cast, but it had the Cannoneer Turtle with Ward
Yeah,
4.
yeah, that was like new back then, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Kappa Cannoneer.
and I wish that I would have just played like Eldrazi or Hogak, looking back because everybody was playing that, and like Hogak
You know
and
what?
Eldrazi play Force, and that
You
would
know what
have
my legacy
destroyed
deck
me.
is right now, right? Basically Eldrazi.
I was gonna say, is it Eldrazi?
Nope. But it plays Eldrazi.
Oh, you play fucking 12 post, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, good Tron.
I'm actually
Every
gonna
time
be
I play
doing
Legacy,
some
I'm
Moto.
reminded why the modern bandit is the way that it is, you know?
Do you ever play Moto?
Um, I have an on and off again relation. Like whenever I kid myself that I want to do good at an event that I'm preparing for, like I'll reactivate my Moto subscription, but I haven't recently. Obviously, like I've been I think Warhammer, like I've been less and less interested in Magic since the year started. Modern is pretty stale for me right now. Like I play Green Tron, and like there was already very little skill and nuance to playing that deck,
I'm
and
gonna say
now you don't even have to make Tron. You just get to 4 lands and you win, kind of thing. Like eh,
it's
it's fun to
stale. I
rake
play
up
Green
store
Tron.
credit, but it's well okay, but. that the other thing is like there's not really much room for our local meta to grow in response to like anything like what I'm playing or what anybody else is playing. Like I've been getting a lot more enjoyment out of Pioneer and Legacy, but like even that is like nowhere near the enjoyment I get out of just like rolling up and smoking and like painting minis for like a few hours on end. Like I have skipped the past 2 or 3 FNMs to stay home and paint Warhammer minis, which is a
Sure.
weird statement coming from me. If you know any, like anybody who knows anything like about it, like FNM is my Sunday church. That's my religion. That's where I would attend
Yeah, pre-release is a
every like
holiday for
weekly.
me.
Yeah, and instead I'm just like, yeah, I'll stay home and paint Abaddon some
Well, I just started playing MTGO again because I realized I still had Hogak on there, and
more. Oh,
I just man, Legacy is a whole nother beast, man. I love it so much.
dude, I have had so much fun with the like learning Cloud Post, the intricacies of a like not mono green, not quite colorless. Like you play Primeval Titan and Emrakul as a combo win condition, but also you can dark. Like there's so many little play patterns, and you also get the benefit of like nobody knowing how to play against it because nobody plays
Nobody
Cloud
plays
Post.
it. Yeah.
And it's super cheap. If like I have a proxy tabernacle, but outside of that, I own almost everything in foil already. Like it's not an expensive legacy deck, and it rewards you for putting the reps in. I have to grab 1 bottle of paint off of my shelf, just
Go for
real
it.
quick.
Hmm, yes. Hmm.
All right, I have returned. Hello.
Hello. Um, but aside from that, I'm gonna I've been losing my I don't know if you've seen me much on Twitter, but I've been losing my goddamn mind the last couple days. Well, since last night, I guess.
I would
Um,
see you on Twitter if fucking Counterpoints didn't tweet like 16 tweets a minute and fill up the entirety of my following. Like, I love you, Connor, but Jesus fucking Christ. And some of it is my shit too. Some of it is him retweeting me, to be fair. So thank you for the boost, but also
I just
he's the
debated
only one.
him.
Oh yeah, what'd you debate over?
Polyamory. He's
Oh,
anti-polyamory.
I believe that. I absolutely
Yeah.
believe that he would be. Yeah. But he seems to be like I always get the impression that like if you treat him in good faith, he's a pretty reasonable fella. How was he?
Yeah, so post debate, he was doing like some kind of like double speaky shit to me that I didn't really realize until afterwards.
Okay.
A couple of my friends came on and were like, "No, that's not what he was saying." And I was like, "Oh, you know what? What you're saying makes perfect sense to me. I just didn't catch that because I'm just sort of blind to that kind of rhetoric."
You're
But I
just
think
too sweet and innocent.
uh yeah, so like
I'm
if I
teasing,
point
I'm
out that
sorry.
the data agrees with me, and then somebody says, "Yeah, but," like I'm not I guess I'm not really thinking of the fact that like that they're saying
Yeah,
that
they're
this is
just
insufficient
denying
for
the
me.
data. Yeah, you just
Yeah.
confront them right there and go, "Wait, why is what I gave you not good enough?"
Yeah,
Kind of
so
put the
it's like
pressure on them. Yeah,
it's
I
not
get
even
you.
like in my brain that like somebody's gonna acknowledge that that's what the data says and also reject it. So I guess I missed that a little bit. But otherwise, I'm been super pissed off because uh Mr. Girl thinks he knows physics all of a sudden and thinks the universe is on the event
Yes.
horizon of a black hole. And I've studied physics for like 15 years. And so
Uh-oh.
I'm like irate about this.
Is the bridge about to get burned? Is the bridge gonna be burned?
I don't think so, but he agreed to talk to me about it. He said he wants to have a physicist on. I was like, well, if you can't find a physicist, I'll be happy to come on your podcast and then angrily leave in their place. Um,
I actually wanted to say something to you regarding Mr. Girl because I've definitely pivoted a lot more from a VGGer to like middling the line, straddling the epic line between VGG and DGG. Like, you know,
ooh,
trying not to break my back as I limbo under that fence line back and forth. But I have been going through a lot because I like to listen to panels.
Sure.
I like to get the variety of opinions, and it also exposes me to a lot of different types of rhetoric. So, like, I'm still trying to learn. That gives me a good like idea of different styles of argumentation, and it's in a really quick for rather than having to listen to like a bunch of one-on-one debates. I do still listen to those because like there's still a lot to be gained from like listening to just one person talking to another. But like when you hear a panel, you get to hear a lot of different perspectives, different like argumentation styles, and it's for someone trying to learn on the fly and speedily like me, it's very helpful. But I've heard a lot from Mr. Girl, and I think that I will admit that some of my previous notions about him may have indeed been misconceptions, but I still can't dissuade myself from the fact that his argumentation against Vosh was particularly poor situationally. And like I don't really want to relitigate that because after 4 hours, I don't think
Yeah.
you and I are able to litigate that any further. But I did want to say that I'm not quite sure where I stand on him, but it's definitely a little less hostile than before, just in my conception of him. Hearing more of him speak, I understand what you're saying now about that's just the way he talks for certain things. Like I definitely get what you were trying to say there. So I want to apologize for being a little bit too overzealous the last time we talked about him.
It's okay. I think I've told you before. He said the first step into loving him is hating him.
Well,
You
I
have
don't even
Most
think
people
I
have
ever
to
hated him.
you
I
have to
was just
hate
a
him
bit put
enough to
off
really
by him.
listen to him. And he also, like I said, if you listen to half of what he says, sometimes if you listen to 90% of what he says, it sounds fucking terrible. But if you give him a chance to finish what he's saying, he always brings it back around. You're like, I get it now. Okay. But like, God damn, why'd you say it like that?
See, and that's where I think the only division would continue to be is okay, I get what you were saying, but why the fuck would you phrase it like that?
The
And
reason is because he
that's
thinks himself an
basically, but
artist.
well, right, but that's basically that was what it came down to with me for the Vosh thing. Like even after all of this retrospection was like, oh, I still think that like knowing who you were talking to, or rather who he was talking to, he probably should have been a little bit more. I think we talked during that about like how conversations about compromise and meeting in the middle when it comes to communication so that everybody can understand each other.
Yeah.
Um, and but I did want to bring that up because I had, of course, every time he comes up in a panel, I actually think of you first. Your face pops into my head before his because most of them are audio only. Not because I think it's you talking, but because I remember how many conversations we've had about him. So,
Yeah.
anywho,
And
I
to be
just wanted
fair,
to address that. Yeah.
whenever he stirs shit up, people message me. They don't message him. So
Oh, for fuck's sake! You're like who
I'm
is
the
it?
Mr. Girl guy.
Yeah, you're like his bulldog. You're his defender, I guess. How do
Um,
you feel about that? Being the
so
default defender for Mr. Girl.
I guess to an extent, like I'm pretty okay with it because I think that in a lot of instances, I think that I'm better equipped than he is to talk to people who are already like decided against him.
I
Because
can agree with that.
I can speak both languages, you know. I can speak Mr. Girl fluently, so I can translate to the more normie side of things.
No, I can agree. Having spoken with you about him, I can agree with that. The way that it is a bit like having a foreign language interpreted to me at times, but the way that you talk about him, you definitely provide a different depth of nuance that I wouldn't. But the like, and just to be like the put the nail on this, that was kind of the thing with the Vosh thing is like even I don't think you should have to have an interpreter sitting next to you to fully understand what someone is trying to say.
Uh,
But
sure, I fully understand that
as
side
long
of
as
it.
they're speaking the same, like, well, as long as they're speaking the same language, kind of, you know what I'm saying. Like,
English, yeah.
yeah, I don't feel like I should have to have it translated to me to go, oh, no, I understand. Now that you've explained it to me, like, that makes a lot more. Like, I consider myself a pretty, like, not a reasonably intelligent person, like, capable of following along a conversation. Like, I just get thrown off by, oh my God, the light is, like, awesome when it's right in my face, isn't it? It's like
Y-
trying to find the stupid balance of, like, my boom arm, and my light so I can see what I'm doing, and.
Yeah, you have like the same complexion as my wife does right now, and she's albino.
I mean, I'm Irish. I'm a like fourth generation Irish, so that's not quite albino, but we're getting there.
Yeah, you guys are notoriously white.
Just that's gonna be my rap album, Notoriously
Notoriously
White.
white.
Yeah.
Um, I lost my
So
oh,
what did you want to talk about? I just
um,
kind of
oh, so I actually do have I'm curious what you think about my thoughts on the Space Marine thing because I feel like there's enough people in the Warhammer community that I guess let me put it this way. I think that making changing like a fictional canon to allow it to be more inclusive just for the sake of inclusivity is like it just doesn't end up working out in most situations. It seems
right.
like
I
it just
agree.
ends
It's
up being
cringe.
dog shit.
Yep, I agree, and that I've actually said as much on my own Twitter a few times. I think that just like, I think that inclusivity can be a portion of the argument because like the end result of inclusivity is more it appealing to more people. Like that just
Yeah.
seems to be the end result. But like trying to rely on that as your only, oh, and that's why we should do female space marines. I don't agree with that. I think there are other reasons that you could like add on to back up that argument. Like as I said, it could be a portion of it, but I agree. It's not. It can't stand on its own. It's a weak ass fucking argument.
Yeah, looks like what's more of a meme than the Ghostbusters movie? Um
Oh geez, I mean that I hate that movie. I like Ghostbusters. The original Ghostbusters is genuinely one of my favorite movies of all time because it's such a like perfect storm of like comedy genius, good like writing, good sets, good and like just good everything. And it's I mean it's blasphemous. The and like I don't even dislike any of those actresses really. I like Leslie Jones and Kate McKinnon quite a bit actually, and it's so sad. Like, yeah, no, you can't just do inclusivity for inclusivity's sake. It's
yeah.
the end consequences of that are just like, yeah, no. That's part of my counter to that, like just having that as being the only argument. And I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but like because I'm being blocked by wokehammer idiots now too. Because I'm the one who fights both of them. But part of the thing that I would say there is that is the justification that you now have to parade out in front of all of the people who are leaving the hobby. Is you say, well, we wanted more inclusivity and what else like I feel like if you have more to that like it's a defensible argument but like no that's not. I know that I've just said that 3 times but I'm sorry.
No, no, you're good. Yeah, that's my big issue with the idea that like when people are like hammering it down that like we need like I guess the idea that we need female space marines is the
Yeah,
thing that I think is silly. Oh, we
yeah.
don't need them, but like if they wanna create a reason why this has happened, that makes sense with the canon. So it should come from a place of creativity and inspiration on the writing team's part,
Oh,
and not
absolutely.
on and honestly, I think that anytime a franchise only does something because it's what the fan wants, it's probably a really bad creative move.
um Having seen Rogue One, that Star Wars movie, I agree because
Hey,
that
thank you,
movie is
Froggy.
just Star Wars porn. Like I like Red Letter Media once described that as just like the last 40 minutes of that movie are just like a high budget Star Wars fan film, which do tend to just be like, I'm a fan. What do I like about this? Let me throw a bunch of that in there. And so when stuff like that does happen, I would agree. Like just giving fans exactly what specific I look like a fucking anime villain right now.
It's so funny you
The
use that as an
glasses.
example. I can watch Star Wars now because of Rogue One.
Oh
Um,
God.
when I was a
Oh no.
kid, wait, I don't know if I said it. Thank you for gifting a membership, Froggy Style. I always appreciate you, buddy. You're literally the best. Um,
Froggy style, thank you for donating. You're the best.
this motherfucker has gifted more memberships than everybody combined. He's amazing.
Then he gets love from my stream too.
That's what's up. Uh, when I was a kid, I watched Star Wars, and so like this is just me like like I'm not like nearly as like fucking whacked out and like analytical about everything as I am now. But I was like, wait, why is there a part in the Death Star that you can just shoot and blow it up? That's so dumb. And like I hated Star Wars because of that. Like it's like this doesn't make any sense. Like if I'm like 8
See,
years old and I'm offended by how stupid like this plot hole is, like that's a problem. And I was like, well, you know what? If you're gonna spend that much money, make a whole ass movie to fix it, like, all right, I'll take another look. I'll give Star Wars another chance.
yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people who's like, there's portions of, I think that if I can just be blunt, I think that cinema sins, and I'm not saying this is obviously you were 8, like I don't think YouTube might not have even been around back then,
No, it was
but
not.
yeah, so like this isn't directed at you in any way, but it's that style of like thinking that I think CinemaSins has fucked a bunch of people's brains into being like overly analytical about how logical and rational everything that happens in a movie is. I think that movies are kind of like, I mean, it's an art form. So it
Yeah.
combines a lot of like different mediums together to create like this end result, which can be a whole bunch of different things. But I think when you engage with any art form, it comes with some caveats attached, just so you can actually properly appreciate it. And I think there are certain things in movies, and this is going to sound, really. I can litigate it with an example if need be. I think there are certain things in movies that you should be like, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then there are certain things in movies where it's like, okay, the grander narrative of this, the importance of it isn't necessarily that it logically makes sense. It's that it's there for the character to do to progress further on their journey. And the reason that the Death Star has a hole in it isn't because it was designed well, or isn't because they forgot. Like George Lucas did not think of that. Like the reason it's there is so Luke Skywalker can shoot
It's a
it and
plot
blow it up.
device.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
literally just a plot device. And I think that like it makes a lot more sense. It works a lot better as a plot device when you add in Rogue One with the backstory, or even if you go forward to Jedi, that makes even more sense because like, oh, well, it's under construction. It makes sense that it's vulnerable when it's under construction. That makes more sense than we have our completed space station that has this very, very tiny. I guess from my perspective, it was always the kind of thing like the Empire being, because especially being in like, into 40K now, the Imperium is like massive, right? It's a million worlds with like quintillions of humans under its control. It Stuff slips through the cracks all the time in like designs and stuff like that. And I have no reason to believe that with the pan-galactic empire in Star Wars, that they wouldn't have like, even without Rogue One explaining it, that there wouldn't be like, okay, well, it's literally this like they even address it in A New Hope. It's the trench is like barely wide enough for anybody to like do anything to. Like they're not. The point is they're not expecting like a group of fighter pilots to be bold enough to do this really, really long trench run in the face of all of the defenses of the station just for a shot at maybe blowing it up through this tiny hole that like is really hard to hit in the first place. Like, but I can also totally understand where you're coming from. You're like, okay, well, like they say in the Family Guy, like put some plywood over it, like nail a board over it. Like, why is it open at all?
Yeah,
But
it's the
I can
most
totally. It's an
important it's the
exhaust
most
for
important
it, but
thing
like I get
ever
it.
created. Yeah, put a
It's so
great.
important that not only did they build a second one, they built a planet-sized one in episode 7, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so like I can let some things go. I'll still make fun of it if it doesn't make any sense, but
Oh,
I like,
absolutely.
but it won't
No,
interfere with me.
absolutely.
Like Gurren Lagann has a 10 million light year tall robot. I'm like, oh, it's useless. It literally can't move in
Yeah.
any amount of time that makes sense. Like, how's this giant fighting robot supposed to fight? It's going to
Well,
take
we could
a
even talk about
year or 10 years
Ghostbusters,
for
right?
it to touch its toes. What?
We could talk about like Ghostbusters, right? Why does the terror dog go after Lewis Tully? Why does it not just possess somebody else? Well, because Lewis Tully is in the story and he's been weird and creepy with Dana the whole time. And it's funny to have those two characters seduced towards each other because of demons. Like that's the comedy bit. Or why is the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man walking down? That doesn't make any sense. Why does shooting it make it melt like marshmallow? Like there's there's
These
certain permissiveness you got to
Yeah,
allow
yeah,
for with
you can
movies.
grant
Yeah.
that within the logic of like the universe. But like
Well, and that Egon is terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought. Once you're past that point, you know.
Sure.
Not that I've seen that movie 8 quadrillion times or anything like that.
Fair. So like the Gurren Lagann robot, like I let it go, but if my roommate ever brings it up, I'm like, yeah, but like it's too big to move, right? Like it's not like I just to fuck with him, but like I
Well,
can watch that and not be like destroyed by it.
like orc magic in 40K. You know how orc magic works in 40K?
No,
Well, do you know how magic works in 40K?
no, I
It's
don't.
okay. You're born with an innate ability. You're born as something called a psyker. You have an innate ability to channel the warp, which
Oh, it's that big
is
rift the demons
it's
come out of.
hell. Well, the warp is a different dimension. The Maw of Terror is that big it's a big rip between the warp and the material reality. But the
Oh,
warp is just that's what you go through like when you space travel, when you do warp travel, you put a shield around yourself, you go through hell and then you pop out on the other side in materials in like real space. But if you're a psyker, you're able to channel the warp through yourself to access demonic powers, which can go, a few ways. Sometimes you open a portal to hell inside yourself, and demons are walking by, and they just kind of reach through you, and now you're a bloody pile on the floor, and there's demons everywhere.
oh,
Um, so yeah, I mean it's 40K, right? But orc psychers are a little bit different. They're called weird boys. And orc magic is very specifically powered by belief. So if a weird boy can get enough orcs believing in a given thing, that thing manifests in reality. Their
oh,
psychic ability directly impacts reality. So for example, orcs believe that red ones go faster. Like the idea if they paint something red, it will go faster. And because they believe this, orc vehicles painted red go faster.
that's funny.
Blue vehicles are luckier because blue ones are lucky. Like this is like orc. There's a I forget what it is, but there's a bunch of like human guardsmen shooting at orcs, and they run out of bullets, and they're still holding their guns up. They go pew 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 pew, and the orcs fall over actually dead.
That's really funny.
Yeah, so like
So you
that's
can use it
but it's
against them
like
too.
yeah, but like when you think about that, like you go, okay, well, what are the implications of that, like on a long enough time scale? If because there is like this orc messiah character that's going around and trying to unify a bunch of these orc clans. What happens if he gets enough of them believing in, that he's like stronger than the emperor? Does that just become reality?
Yeah, why
Like
wouldn't you? I think it would be a very advantageous to get as many of them as you can and literally brainwash them to believe whatever's advantageous for you.
the thing that keeps orcs in check, though, I will say, is they're all really stupid and they all
Yeah.
just want to fight. So like their gods are ostensibly the most powerful gods because the orcs believe that they are, and there's something like 10,000 orcs, or there's like 1,000 orcs to every one human in the yeah, which there's like quintillions of humans. So like that, how many orcs are there, kind of thing, right? So they believe their gods are the best. Ostensibly, their gods are the strongest, but their gods are all constantly beating the shit out of each other in the warp. So, like, we'll never know. They don't do anything. They just fight constantly. So, like, whether or not they could ever have any impact, like, and that's one of the things I like about 40K is how like everything's ridiculous and somehow in check.
That's fair. I thought you were gonna say it's like my buddy made a D&D character that's a barbarian wizard, but like he's not actually a wizard. He just thinks he is. Like I'll
That's
cast fly
awesome.
on you, and then he'll just throw the person and thinks
That's
that it
an
works.
awesome idea. No, that's a really good idea.
Yeah. So just like I thought it was gonna be like so he said somebody in my chat said orcs are a Twitter poll.
Orcs are what?
A Twitter poll. So like it just because
Kind
like
of, yeah.
ratio
Like it's
makes true.
that is true. That is true.
I actually have a big
My
bone to
buddy
pick
that
with
taught
Gamers
me plays
Workshop.
orcs. Oh, do you?
Yeah, and this is why. Give me 1 second.
Oh, he wandered off into the void.
I pre-ordered this, and this is the collector's edition of the Dark
Ooh,
Souls role-playing
role
game.
playing game. Yeah.
has the like gold embroidery pages and shit.
Yeah.
People who ordered the regular one got theirs a year before me. I paid an extra 50 fucking dollars for this. And when they released the game, it was broken. And
Oh,
so the
man. Well,
collector's edition had to wait until it
welcome
got
to
fixed.
Games Workshop, I'm afraid.
And they were extremely bad at communicating with us. So me and my buddy, who both pre-ordered it, were just like waiting, sending emails and emails, and like getting no updates.
Yeah.
So that really put a sour taste in my mouth.
They do definitely prioritize, or they seem to prioritize certain IPs over others. So unfortunately, that might be a result of that. Just being like, oh, well, this isn't really something that we're super. I will say though, recently they actually did something quite cool with one of their new book releases that I do give them great props for. I don't know if you saw it on my Twitter, but
Uh-uh.
so are you familiar with something called the Horus Heresy?
Yeah, I looked it up because somebody, Wick referred to Mr. Girl as Horus in the,
Oh, did he? In
yeah.
Destiny's community?
So like he broke down who everybody would be, and Mr. Girl was
Okay.
Horus, so I looked him up, and I seen what was up with
Yeah.
that. By the way,
So
here's
Horus.
a mini of mine.
Ooh, is that the
This is
Custodes?
this is a
Looks
Dark
like it.
Souls
Oh,
tabletop
it's a
game,
Dark Souls mini. It looks like it could be an Adeptus Custodes.
and so I
The
got like zombies and stuff. I actually paid somebody to
Oh, they're
paint them
cool. Yeah,
because I'm
that's
not good at
cool.
that.
Yeah, it does not. I mean, I'm doing this shit. Like, it cannot take that much effort to be good at it.
I'm really impressed, like on some of my bigger ones, like where like the fabric gets folded in, like he got like right up in there, and I'm like, this is very
Well, yeah,
impressive.
so actually, I don't know if you can see my I'm about to here, I'll switch my camera over so you can see. I'm actually doing that thing right now that you can it's a cheaty I call it the cheaty bullshit step. Um and this is it's basically just use this thin paint called a wash and you just kind of brush it across like lightly across where you've already painted
Uh-huh.
and
Just
it's
spread
real
it.
it soaks into the cracks of the model and between where you put the paint and sort of
Mm,
like add some accent to it.
I see.
So I always finish my models with a dark wash because it gives them a nice sort of muted effect.
Oh my
Um,
God. I didn't know Gamers Workshop is since 1975. That's crazy.
Dude, yeah, games where I actually have a friend who's literally a buddy who I play Magic with, who also is like helping me with 40K stuff, and he's been playing since like the 80s. So like,
I
yeah,
if Warhammer had a game that like a video game that I could play the 40K tabletop game on, I would totally play it. But I don't.
tabletop simulator basically,
I
but
figured,
yeah,
yeah, if you ever want to show me how to play on TTS, I'm down. But like,
sure.
I
I
have
actually
no
don't own
interest.
TTS yet. I need to buy it.
It's $10. It's not
I
bad.
don't. Excuse me, but all of my money is going to tiny little plastic people,
I was about
sir.
to say, two things of paint. Waiting a week could get you a
How do you
TTS.
know this? How do you know these numbers?
I
Stop being so specific.
I work
You're
I
putting me on
worked in a games.
blast.
I worked at a game store. I worked at a
Oh, okay.
it was retro games. Well, gaming all the way back to like retro, like to from Atari and up, and also like Magic cards. And then we had a Gamer Workshop section in the corner. It was my
Okay.
first job since COVID, and it was really nice because they were the only place I seen they had like a big plastic barrier between the customers and the workers. So it
That
really
is
helped make
nice.
me
Yeah.
feel safe when I went back into the workforce. And I was not the best version of myself when I took that job. I was like, hey, can you pay me in store credit? That way my wife can't get mad when I spend all my money here.
Yeah, I feel you.
And so I did. I worked for store credit for like the first like year that I worked there. And so I just got like a ton of games and cards, but I got 30% off all Magic singles and video games that were used.
That is a way to get started. No, yeah, I can absolutely teach you at some point. It's the game. I mean, the problem is I haven't finished learning the game yet.
Sure.
So, and I'm learning an outdated version. The current edition is 10th edition. I have the
Whoa.
ninth edition Codex, and that's the one that I'm actually more interested in playing because they removed the way that my buddy pitched it to me was ninth edition is AD&D 2 and 10th edition is 5e. And I'm an AD&D 2 guy. I like all that kind of like absurd complexity. Like once you learn those systems, it's the only way you'll ever want to play D&D. Is like yes, it's ridiculously like arcane and rules heavy, but it also allows for so much stuff, like so much variety in gameplay that like and the same thing is true with like ninth edition because with ninth edition of Warhammer. Uh-oh, what's going on with my map white? Um, the same is true with the ninth ed of Warhammer because there's an entire like phase that just got removed in a 10th edition, the psyker phase, like the spell casting phase
Hmm.
that just got like they just removed that in 10th edition. And there's so much like cool stuff that you can do with chaos on that phase that I'm like when my buddy comes over and we play in my basement, we play ninth ed. So as long as you're okay with learning an outdated version, but a more complicated version. Otherwise, I can get to work on learning 10th. I probably need to do that.
I really want to. I played D&D a little bit on stream, but it was my real life one. But I really want to play Shadowrun on stream. I have second edition books for Shadowrun. I got 17 second edition Shadowrun books from the 80s for like $140 on eBay,
Um,
which is an insane price. Um, but
what is that D&D Shadowrun?
so Shadowrun is it's like
It was like Pathfinder.
it's closer to cyberpunk. So
Okay.
imagine like a cyberpunky style game, but it's way more dystopian. Almost everybody's poor. Most people are like fairly racist, and I don't mean like skin color. I mean
Wait,
like
now you're
wrong
just
race.
describing real life.
No, I mean like not skin color. Like orcs don't like humans.
No, I
Humans
get
don't
you.
like dwarves. Everybody's
Like
like
40K racism.
yeah, yeah, and the more technology you have integrated into yourself, the less magic you can be.
That makes sense.
And there's so like the big things are like you can be like a rigger, which is somebody who has like technology like inside their body and uses that
They
to
can
control
assemble
technology.
contraptions.
Well, like you can like directly interface with like the like you can go inside the internet. And it's like
Oh,
Mega Man Battle Network style going in the internet.
sure.
And then the other people are people that can like psychically control uh machines. And also the way that rolls work, um if you want to do something really hard, you get X amount of dice, and if you roll any number of sixes that you roll will count as a six, and you get to re-roll them and add on top of the six. So like a nearly impossible thing would be like an 18. Also though, the thing that I really like about Shadowrun is that sometimes combat's not like in D&D where like HP matters all that much. Like you can get shot in the head and just fucking die. So like you don't really want to just like get into combat with everything that you see because these are like real world stakes. If somebody pulls out a gun, you might just want to try to talk it out so they don't blow your fucking head off.
Yeah, I gotcha.
It's like a lot
Sorry,
more
I'm
recon,
just
less combat.
just transitioning here to I'm waiting for my the only thing left to do with this mini is base it. So and I have to get up and get a whole bunch of stuff. So I would rather just sit here and chill and chat with you. Um I I've been wanting to DM D&D for a while and I've been wanting but like I've been wanting to play, but I think I'm going to be DMing a campaign for my partner as if she can get a group together. But
Um,
yeah, no, Warhammer is if you don't like the combat in D&D, don't you're not
I
gonna like
do. I just don't like
Warhammer.
that it's. I don't like that you're forced into it. So like when I plan on running Shadowrun, instead of like if somebody strikes somebody in your party, you're not automatically in combat. You guys can try to like just be like, hey, you know what? He fucked up. We're gonna grab him and get out of here. Okay. I just don't like that you're always forced into combat in D&D because sometimes
Yeah.
maybe my character just would choose not to fight anyways. Maybe I could get hit and be like, all right, I'm gonna dip because
Yeah.
that just seems a bit more realistic to me. And then if you're playing Shadowrun where people literally have guns, um, or like if nobody in your party has magic and somebody like is much stronger than you guys has a sword, like somebody's gonna die. It's really easy to die. Um, so
Okay.
yeah, but like Warhammer, that game is pure combat, right?
It's yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's like objectives and things, but more or less, I mean, what I've ended up doing is just kind of like brute forcing it as like just moving my units down and just churning it because my buddy plays orcs, but he plays I think they're called like scrapyard orcs. They have big mechs.
Oh.
But the problem is that the way that my army is configured right now, when I borrow my when I borrow units from him to fill it out, is there's a lot of anti-tank stuff.
Mm.
So most of his point value, because everything is based around like points.
Yeah.
So depending on how much damage, how many how many wounds a model can take, it'll be worth a certain amount of points. And his points are kind of concentrated into his big like mechs. And so, for example, last week we were playing, and he had this thing called a Gorkanaut, and I got to go first. And I had these Marines sitting on top of a building with like anti-tank laser cannons, and I like critted every dice roll and took it from 24 wounds to 9 on turn 1 before he even got to move it because they were in range just the way the battlefield was set up. So like there's stuff like that that will happen that's I mean it was a cool moment for the gameplay, but like I can imagine being him and being incredibly frustrated that like all of a sudden my my marquee unit is just basically dead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, you play Magic and you get fucked on lands, you know.
Yeah, but not on turn 1. Like this is like someone like reaching into your hand and taking it's like somebody
Legacy
grief
Storm.
scamming you. I was gonna say this is grief
Oh,
scam. Like that's what I did to him. Was like I'm like okay, you just get a massive bunch of your forward momentum just gone, just deleted. Your
that's
massive
fair.
mech is down over half of its health. Good luck, buddy. Like no, the thing is though, it's expensive.
Happened.
Warhammer is very expensive. I
The bag fell out of my hand and hit
I'm
the
sorry, 1
cement
minute.
and punctured.
no, you're
So
good.
it has a
You
hole,
okay?
hole inside. Yeah, I didn't
Okay, that's
fall.
fine.
The bag fell.
All right, I'll just drink that one later.
Okay. It's not open, but it does have one tiny hole.
Yeah, I know. My wife fell and my Red Bull broke, but she
Oh
at least
no.
you grabbed
She
a
okay?
cup for it. Yeah, that was. She's like explaining to me. I'm like, yeah, are you okay? Like, look, worry about the Red Bull in a minute.
Yeah, that sounds
I
like my
bought me
fiance.
one at
Yeah.
Walgreens, and then that happened, so we walked back up to 7-Eleven. The 7-Eleven guy.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
By the way, do you play any video games?
I do.
What are you
I've
playing?
actually finally, well, so recently I've started actually going through Baldur's Gate 3 and trying to finish it. Um,
Thank you,
I
Elk.
haven't
She's good.
I haven't gotten super far, but
Me neither. When I
uh
finish Resident Evil, I'm supposed to play with my best friend IRL on stream.
the Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, because somebody in
It's
my chat
fantastic.
asked me, like, I would really like to see you play Baldur's Gate 3 and hear your thoughts on it. I'm like, oh, cool. So my buddy's like, hey, you gonna play Baldur's Gate with me? I was like, let me finish Resident Evil 4 on stream and then I will.
No, it's definitely it deserves all the praise. That much I can say.
Yeah,
It's a
my
very good
roommate
game.
has been ranting and raving about it. I also got my Switch hooked up for streaming now, so I can play
Ooh.
Mario Maker. And I
You
just
can
got a
play
thing.
Skyrim.
I own it for PC. I
So
just
do
hooked up my
I.
PS4 controller to my Switch, so
Nice.
now I have a real controller to play Mario.
I didn't know you could do that.
I got a little USB stick. This thing lets me use any controller I want.
Nice. That's is that third party apparatus? That doesn't sound like something Nintendo would make.
Yes, it is. But Nintendo is pretty cool about letting it work.
By pretty cool, is it like they don't know
They're
about it
not
or it's
patching
too
it
much
out.
hassle to deal with?
Oh,
All right, that's fair.
they know. So things like that for Nintendo, I think it's just like a win-win for them. Like somebody else wants to do all the work to make it compatible. Sure, that makes our shit more accessible. Why not?
I remember do you remember my grandparents used to be big garage sailors, so I actually grew up even though I was a kid in like the early 2000s, I grew up with consoles from the 80s and 90s. So
Me
I grew
too.
up with the original Game Boy, I grew up with the Super Nintendo. And I remember there was like we had like 4 normal Super Nintendo controllers, and then one like
Fucked up one.
it wasn't called like it was. I got my head jumped to Raw Dogs, but like it was something like that. It's like Mad Cats or something like that, where it's like a third party controller, and it had like a bunch of extra it was like a little bit bulkier, a little bit more angular. It had a bunch of buttons that just didn't do anything.
Did it have the
Like
slidey disc thing for the D-pad?
it had a turbo switch that didn't do anything. That would just and no, that's not true. The turbo switch stopped the A button from working, and we could never figure out why. Like it just
Um,
if you had the turbo, so like you could reach over because it was on like the if this is the controller, it was along the bottom. So like right the cord would came out the top, but this was like on the bottom. So if you had that controller, you had to literally like play with it super hugged to your body because the kids that my grandma babysat for would reach over and fucking flip the turbo switch and just turn off the A button in the middle of like we would play this WrestleMania game and that was the main like grapple button, and they just turn it off.
that's funny. Yeah, I
You always
I
had to
hated those
check
switches on them. So there
all this
was like the
extra
Super
shit.
Nintendo
Yeah,
Pro Pad, the Competition Pad Pro, the Turbo Touch 3D, which seemed
this
like a
was some
nightmare.
third party. This was some
These are
third
all third
party
party.
shit. Yeah.
And then there was the Performance. It's just called
Ooh.
Performance.
Made by Raw Dogs, right? The performance. The performance enhancer.
By Raw Dogs.
I can't remember what the name of it. It was literally something like that, like Mad Cats or Mad Dog or
I actually have
what was it?
they 100% work on real Super Nintendos and NESs. I have a wireless Bluetooth Super NES and NES controllers.
Oh, base.
I'm big into like retro gaming.
No, I
I had
oh
to sell
sorry.
a lot of it because took over my living room. My shelf was full and it was like they were like flooded onto the floor. I'm like, this is the problem.
I used to play a lot more video games, but I will say lately I've just kind of slow like between Warhammer and then like work and like doing real life, politics stuff. It's there's not a lot of time to go around for like I can't just sit down and waste plus spending time with partner, making time with friends. Like you can't I don't really have the I have 4 hours free to just sit here and like wander around in Skyrim anymore. Like which is kind of
Sure.
sad, but like at the same time, there is a game coming out in September that I'm very much looking forward to. It is a Warhammer game. I don't know if you've
Oh,
seen it. Space Marine 2. Have you seen any
I've heard of
gameplay
it.
footage?
I've
Oh
heard
my
of
god,
it.
it looks amazing. It looks so good. Oh, it's like third person. So the original Space Marine came out like a long time ago, like back when like the first Gears of War came out.
Oh, I did
And
see gameplay from this. It looks so
it
good.
looks so good.
It's
But like
gorgeous.
the original one was way back when, and now this is like the bringing it back, and it looks so cool. Because like in the original one, you're fighting like orcs and chaos, and
Uh-huh.
this is Tyranids. Obviously, if you've seen any of the key art, and like the swarms that I've seen rendered on this, like we're talking like because the idea with the Tyranids is they are the unending swarm there's sort of a theory that they've eaten every other like they've emptied every other galaxy of life. They've eaten everything else in every other galaxy, and we're the last one. And then after that, it's just going to be Tyranids. Not only that,
They
but
look like slivers.
yeah, well, they're a hive mind. They're controlled by this like
They are
massive
slivers.
intelligence external to the multiverse. Damn it! Now you got me with magic. They're controlled by this massive hive mind that's outside of our galaxy that is like god level intelligence and like my personal opinion is based on like the inevitable if you look at inevitability of like different factions when it comes to 40k. I think that if things are just left as is with no narrative changes, the Tyranids still eat everything in the end. Like there's so many of them, and the way that they reproduce themselves is like they just like sludge everything down into this biomass, and then they can just 3D print whatever models they need, or whatever models, whatever units they need, like for any given invasion. Like it's
Oh, they're literally slivers. Oh my
They're
God.
well,
Uh-huh.
they're kind of like slivers mixed with Eldrazi because the entire purpose of the Tyranids is just eat. That's what they do. They eat. They consume. They consume biomass and then they move on. They consume biomass and they move on. And like I said, if the theories are true, they've eaten everything else except for our galaxy. We're what's left.
The last bastion of life.
Yeah, but they've got to get through all those orcs first. So
Well, I assume Space Marines would be a bit of a challenge too.
well, I will say a lot of the Imperium's response to Tyranid infestations seems at a certain point just seems to be exterminate the planet. We don't know what else to do. Which is when they if you're familiar with Halo, when the Covenant would glass a planet, that's just something the Imperium does. Like if there's like heretics or gene stealer cults, which are like gene stealer cults are humans that are possessed by weird biological impulses to like worship these gods from far off and say, all right, everybody, we're gonna get you prepared for these gods. They're coming. Our gods are coming. Like imagine like what is it? Was it David Koresh? Like what was that? What were they called? Where they're like the spaceship is coming to like take us away. Like cultists like that, where they're like we have gods coming, they're coming to bring us our salvation, and then the gods arrive and it's the Tyranids. Like they were infected by like Tyranid biomass, and they have made a cult that just willingly gives themselves to the Tyranid. Like it's a form of Tyranid invasion. But like if the Imperium finds a gene stealer cult and doesn't know what to do about it, like if it's out of control, they'll just raise the planet and move on. So, like, I don't know. It just seems like there's so many Tyranids and they come from outside of the galaxy, and we don't really know how many there are outside of the galaxy to begin with. That just seems what's going to happen. On a side note, one of the most horrifying things I've read in Warhammer so far was a bit of a story where
You have to kill
it's
the
a
hive mind, right?
it's a you can't kill the hive mind.
Why?
I don't know. I don't because where is it?
Well, I'm saying that's what you'd have to do to win.
Well, you would have to do that, but like I don't. You'd have to leave the galaxy to do
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
not really yeah. But there's a short. It wasn't a short. It was a chapter in a book where a space station got consumed by a Tyranid hive ship because their ships are alive, like they're big organisms, and literally this space station just gets swallowed by like a crew, like basically like a battle cruiser, a Tyranid battle cruiser, and digested. And
Wait,
it's
how did
told from the perspective of the technicians inside the space station as it gets digested.
wait, how are they controlled by the hive mind if it's that far away? Because if it's in another
Because
galaxy,
they're
we're
everywhere.
talking
Because they're everywhere.
so does each one act like a little like mini transmitter?
Yes.
Okay, because I was gonna
They
say,
all communicate with each other. There are some that have like heightened levels of intelligence, but they're all subservient to the broader hive mind. And there are so many within our galaxy that they could literally just be that could be the entirety of the hive mind for all we know. Except the problem is,
there's just
you
like
know,
an
you push
emergent
the
quality of this godlike consciousness from the collective.
it's too vast and intelligent to just be contained within our galaxy. There's
Gotcha.
something else going on. Like it could be a chaos god. Like in the end, it could just be Zinch fucking around because there's Zinch is the deception god, and like that's such an easy way
Oh,
to just
I've
go.
seen a little film about that.
Yeah, like you can just it was me the whole time. Ha ha ha. But I think my
My
partner's home. I may have to hop off. So let me check.
okay.
But yeah, I know we we just ended up talking about Warhammer. Like I was saying earlier, there's so much to talk about that you just tiny questions end up with like, all right, let me spend the next hour and a half explaining this to you. Because you need all of this foundational information, like the Horus heresy, right? I don't even remember why that came. I remember that Mr. Girl is Horus, but I don't even remember why I invoked that earlier. But the Horus Heresy is like the important event where everything changed, where like the God Emperor ended up in the big chair. Because right now he's not like he used to be like a big guy. I'm sure you've heard all this before. He used to be like the God Emperor, and now he's the Corpse Emperor who has
Mm-hmm.
to have like 10,000 psychers fed to him every single day just to keep him alive. Because if he dies, the lighthouse that he provides in the warp for like ships to navigate just goes away.
He's like the mirror of the emperor. Then, yeah.
What you mean?
That he is he's like the linchpin of like he's like the linchpin of like a very dramatically important part of existence for this universe.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Okay. Hey guys, I just found out that Destiny and Lex Friedman thing happened. Well, I guess I know what I'm doing after this. If you guys want to stick around for that, I had no idea. But I think that when I see it, I'll have some ideas. I'm really, really excited about it. Did you know Destiny and Ben Shapiro talked? They had their debate?
My partner is home, so I'm going to skedaddle and spend some time with her. But thank you very much for the conversation, buddy, as
You,
always.
you're welcome. Did you hear the last thing I said?
I did not on the when I dropped my headphones.
Oh, I was just pointing out that Destiny and Ben Shapiro talked. They had their debate. I just found out.
I know, yeah, no, I've already started listening through it, and I know that everybody's already meme posting about how like blah blah blah, it's so much suffering, blah. But like I've
I haven't
genuinely
seen
been
it. I
enjoying
just
listening to
just
it.
found out about it like
Nope.
within
Yeah,
5
I've been waiting
minutes.
for it. I've been waiting for it. Destiny talked about it when he was doing his Alex Jones like retrospective because he did that debate with Alex Jones recently. Well, debate,
Debate,
but
yeah.
yeah, which I also did watch. But he mentioned during the retrospective that Lex Friedman had done this thing with him and Ben Shapiro, and I was like, oh my god, I want to hear that. Like that sounds awesome. So yeah, I think I'm like a third of the way through it, but so far it's quite good. I mean, it's Ben Shapiro at times, so like there's that, but like it's not nearly as I was joking with my partner earlier that because it could so easily have turned into a nasal voice off because but like nasally fast talking like battle, but I don't know if Destiny was like sick or something when he was doing or if he was deliberately like doing something to his voice, but it's like lower and a little bit more like gravelly than like it's almost like he's trying to specifically distinctify himself from Ben Shapiro because Ben Shapiro is just like normal Ben Shapiro, just like talking really fast. But yeah, so anyways, yeah, you should check it out. You will
Yeah, I'm
enjoy it.
about to, like immediately.
Yeah.
Have a good night, man.
Yeah, you
Say
too,
hi to your
buddy.
partner for me.
Yeah, of course. Take care.
You too. All right. I didn't know that was a thing. So I'm gonna do that. Give me like 3 minutes, and then I'm gonna pull that up and watch that. I'm so excited. Destiny has talked a lot of shit about Ben Shapiro in the past. So, in my opinion, in order for it to be like a real win for him, he needs to absolutely knock it out of the park. Because he's criticized Ben Shapiro ever since like I've been aware of him. Just give me like 2 minutes, and then just gonna set you guys on the intro screen for like just a couple of minutes, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I need to change my titles.
If they do,
Uh,
if they don't.
Wait.
Call me if you need anything, maybe. Sorry.
Okay. Oh man. Tell me I can change them all at once. Can't. Oh, I have to abandon Twitch. I'm gonna go to kick. Oh shit. I just realized my kick title was the same as yesterday's this whole time. I really wish stream would get with that.
Shut up, Pure.
Okay. Pull this over here. Close out my magic game. All right. I'm so excited. I didn't even know this was happening.
Something has to happen with.
Oh, Jesus. There was like no introduction there or anything. He's just already going. All right. Pull that up and. Oh, wait. I gotta switch to my watching. And shrink it. Expand it. And maybe make me a little bit bigger. Oh, I put a lot of work into making my camera prettier. I didn't get to finish it last night. I tried, but I did a totally offline or non-streamed video, and it should be coming out in the next day. I did a game review of Animal Crossing New Horizons. So I really focus on how can I make my camera look better. I know it hasn't looked the best on stream, but it should now. I looked into a bunch of stuff on how I can make it better, and it seems like it looks like a lot better than it did. Oh, but I did also add that to it. I definitely prefer to not have this filter on though. Although it looks a lot better than my green screen did. I don't know. Guess you guys can let me know if you think it was better with the pseudo green screen or not. I actually think that pseudo green screen looked pretty good for me. I had no complaints about it. I thought that it had very little distracting artifacts like a real green screen does. All right. I guess there ain't nothing else to do but to just play it. Oh. Muted.
What has to happen is something has to happen with Iran. There has to be some diplomatic bilateral communication.
No, what has to happen is the containment of Iran.
History moves in one direction, right?
Why?
Because of time.
Communism, Nazism, all of that was a regression from what was happening at, for example, the beginning of the 19th century and the 20th century.
In what way?
Do you think that today Donald Trump knows that he lost the election?
Absolutely.
So I don't.
This is one of the areas where when we get into this, I don't understand if there's like brain breaking happening or what's going on. I don't know what world we can ever live in where we say that Trump is less divisive for the country than Biden.
Joe Biden literally used the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration to try to cram down vax mandates on 80 million Americans. That's insane.
What about supercalifragilistic? And then you're
What about pneumological microscopic?
or the science terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what about the 7,000 letter thing that's from part of biochem?
I got my education in the Soviet Union, so we just did math. We didn't learn here.
Why are you so perfect?
Does body count matter?
What?
The following is a debate between Ben Shapiro and Destiny, each arguably representing the right and the left of American politics, respectively. They are two of the most influential and skilled political debaters in the world. This debate has been a long time coming, for many years. It's about 2.5 hours, and we could have easily gone for many more, and I'm sure we will. It is only round one. This is the Lex Friedman Podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Ben Shapiro and Destiny. Ben, you're conservative. Destiny, you're a liberal. Can you each describe what key values underpin your philosophy on politics and maybe life in the context of this left-right political spectrum? You want to go first?
Yeah. So I think that we have a huge country full of a lot of people, a lot of individual talents, capabilities. And I think that the goal of government, broadly speaking, should be to try to ensure that everybody's able to achieve as much as possible. So, on a liberal level, that usually means some people might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to things like education. They might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to providing certain necessities like housing or food or clothing.
Okay.
But broadly speaking, I mean, I'm
Hey,
still
all-rounder.
communist or socialist. I don't believe in the
It's nice to see you. I haven't seen this at all yet. I just found out about it while I was talking to Big JC. Super excited. But I'm glad to have you here.
total command economy, total communist takeover of all of the, economy. But I think that broadly speaking, the government should kind of like kick in and help people when they need it.
And that government can and should be big.
Not necessarily. I noticed that when liberals talk about government, or especially taxes, it seems like they talk about it for taxes' sake or bigness sake. So people talk about taxes sometimes as like a punishment, like tax the rich. I think taxing the rich is fine insofar as it funds the programs that we want to fund. But Democrats have a really big problem demonizing.
Shoot, you know what? There's no way I'm gonna be able to watch this for 2 hours and 20 minutes and not have a game. So let me move this over so I can play a game while I do this. Yeah, I remember hoping this would happen ages ago while I was a Destiny fan. Yeah, I don't think you even need to be a Destiny fan to want this. Yeah, the Cosmic Skeptic one was pretty interesting. I think it must have been pretty frustrating for him because Destiny's not super hip to philosophy. So I think it was I think Cosmic Skeptic had to put a lot of extra work into
success or
there.
wealth, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to be wealthy, to be a billionaire or whatever, as long as we're funding what we need to fund.
Ben, what do you think it means to be a conservative? What's the philosophy that underlies your political view?
So first of all, I'm glad that Destiny, you're already coming out as a Republican. That's exciting. I mean, we hold a lot in common in terms of, the basic idea that people ought to have as much opportunity as possible, and also insofar
Does his shirt say not a cult?
as the government should do the minimum amount necessary to interfere in people's lives in order to pursue certain functions, particularly at the
It
local
looks like
level.
this is not a cult.
So a lot of governmental discussions on a pragmatic level end up being discussions about where government ought to be involved, but also at what level government ought to be involved. And I have an incredibly subsidiary view of government. I think that local governments, because you have higher levels of homogeneity and consent, are capable of doing more things. And as you abstract up the chain, it becomes more and more impractical and more divisive to do more things. In my view, government is basically there to preserve certain key liberties.
Let's be real. There are just some things that without government that just are never ever going to happen. If it is something that's strictly just for the betterment of everybody, I don't think at this point in time where like we sit in history that it just makes any sense to hope that companies or something are going to take care of things for us. They're not.
Those key liberties pre-exist the government insofar as they are more important than what priorities the government has. The job of government is to maintain, for example, national defense, protection of property rights, protection of religious freedom. Right? These are the key focuses of government as generally expressed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I agree with the general philosophy of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you can't do more on a governmental level, again, as you get closer to the ground, which, by the way, is also embedded in the Constitution. People forget the Constitution was originally applied to the federal government, not to local and state governments. But you know, if I were going to define conservatism, it would actually be a little broader than that, because I think to understand how people interact with government, you have to go to kind of core values. And so for me, there are a couple of premises. One, human beings have a nature. That nature is neither good nor bad. We have aspects of goodness and we have aspects of badness. Human beings are sinful. We have temptations. And what that means is that we have to be careful not to incentivize the bad and that we should incentivize the good. Human beings do have agency and are capable of making decisions in the vast majority of circumstances. And it is better for society if we act as though they do. Second, the basic idea of human nature, there is an idea, in my view, that all human beings have equal value before the law. Yeah, I'm a religious person, so I'd say equal value before God, but I think that's also sort of a key tenet of Western civilization, being non-religious or religious, that every individual has equivalent value in sort of cosmic terms. But that does not necessarily mean that every person is equally equipped to do everything equally well. And so it is not the job of government to rectify every imbalance of life. The quest for cosmic justice, as Thomas Sowell suggests, is something that government is generally incapable of doing, and more often than not botches and makes things worse. So those are a few key tenets, and that tends to materialize in a variety of ways. The easiest way to sum that up would the traditional kind of three legs of the conservative stool, although now obviously there's a very fragmented conservative movement in the United States, would be a socially conservative view in which family is the chief institution of society, right? The little platoons of society, as Edmund Burke suggested, in which free market and property rights are extraordinarily valuable and necessary, because every individual has.
It's a big talking point for conservatives to talk about the free market, but I don't see them ever really trying to protect or defend the free market. Sorry, my wife texted me. She walked to go get dinner.
The ability to be creative with their property and to freely alienate that property. And finally, I tend toward a hawkish foreign policy that suggests that the world is not filled with wonderful people who all agree with us and think like us. And those people will pursue adversarial interests if we do not protect our own interests.
Can I ask a question on that? I'm so curious.
Sure.
Okay. I'm excited for this conversation because I consider you to be really intelligent. But I feel like sometimes there are ways that conservatives talk about certain issues that seem to defy logic and reason, I guess. So here, and I'm sure you feel the same way about well, I feel the same way about progressives, but even some liberals for sure. Before I ask this question, it's going to relate to education. We can agree, broadly speaking, that statistics are real and that not everybody could do everything. So for a grounded example, my life was pretty bad. I got into streaming and I turned my life around, and that was really cool, but I can't expect everybody to do what I did, right?
Destiny calls him intelligent to get him to feel safe and not defensive. Yeah, it's pretty smart. So that way, Ben's not going to be coming in overly defensive. Or just, I think maybe the best value in doing something like that is so that the other person doesn't waste time trying to prove that they're smart. I would imagine in this kind of a debate, it would be extremely frustrating if your opponent is just trying to show well, hey, I know stuff. I know that. I know this. I know that. It's going to help but also it's also going to force the other person to adhere to certain standards. Like Destiny said, I think you would agree that statistics are real. So it's sort of prefacing by saying you're smart. It's going to kind of push him into acknowledging that if I bring up a statistic, you're not going to just sort of disregard it because you don't like it. So it's kind of like holding him to this standard in advance.
Like everybody being able to join the NBA or to be like a streamer.
Well, of
or-
course, everybody
yeah.
has different
Sure.
qualities. Sure.
Okay. So I used to be a lot more libertarian when I was 2021. And one of the things that dramatically changed kind of my view on government manipulation of things in the, I guess, in society came when it came time to deal with my son and the school that he went to. And one of the things that I noticed was when it came time.
Regardless of one's point of view, Ben Shapiro, it can be acknowledged he's smart. He is smart. And this is actually a point that came up with my wife today. We were talking about a mutual friend of ours, and she pointed out that our mutual friend had a really high GPA because she's finishing up her college classes. And she goes, "Wow, I can't believe, like, isn't that surprising? She's really smart. I didn't know." I was like, "Well, yeah. Why would you not think she's smart?" She goes, "Well, she's done a lot of stupid things." And so similarly to I think Ben Shapiro uh, says a lot of stupid things. Smart people can say and do stupid things um, just as easily as a stupid person can. I think sometimes being smart makes you more susceptible to doing things that are stupid because you have confidence in your own intelligence. So you kind of take for granted that you're going to be right. So if you have a bad idea, you might not be as thoroughly
Time just in
investigative
life,
of
so
it if
school-
you're not somebody who's frequently like finding yourself being wrong all the time because you're stupid.
I could either do private education or I could do public. Personally, I did 12 years of Catholic private education. However, the public schools in Nebraska, depending on where you lived, were very, very, very good. And I opted for a certain district. I bought a house there. I moved there. And then my son was able to go to those schools. And he's been going through those schools. And the difference of availability of like technology, like these kids are taking home iPads in like first grade. They've got like huge computer labs and everything. Do you think that there is some type of, I don't want to say injustice or unfairness, because I'm not even looking at it that way, just pragmatically, that there might be children that are in certain schools that if they just had better funding or more access to technologies or things available to them, that those kids would become more productive members of society, that with like a little bit of a help, they could actually achieve more and
Right.
do better for all of society?
So I think that on the list of priorities when it comes to education,
Mhm.
the availability of technology is actually fairly low on the list of priorities.
Sure, the
Meaning
two
that
things
the-
I've heard are food availability and I think air conditioning, I think are the two biggest ones that I hear, but sure.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing in terms of education itself, not just the physical facilities that we're talking about,
Mhm.
would actually be two-parent family households,
Sure.
communities that have fathers in them is
Sure.
actually the number one, decisive according to Roland Fryer and many studies done on this particular topic.
Mhm.
And the idea that money alone, that investment of resources is the top priority in schooling is belied by the fact that LAUSD, which is where I went to school when I was younger,
Mhm.
they pour an enormous amount of money into LAUSD. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars very often per student,
Mhm.
and it does not result in better schooling outcomes. And so when you say, if we could give every kid an iPad, would you give every kid an iPad? The question is not if I had a replicator machine from Star Trek, would I give everybody an enormous amount of stuff? Sure, I would. Every resource is finite, every resource is limited, and you have to prioritize what are the outcomes that you seek in terms of the means with which you are seeking them.
Mhm.
And so, again, I think that the question is I quibble with the premise of the question, which is that again, the chief injustice when it comes to education on the list of injustices is lack of availability to technology or that it's a funding problem. I just don't think that's the case.
Sure, and I can half agree with you there, but I don't think any amount of changes in the schools will create two-parent households, right? We can't bring it.
I totally agree with you.
So
That's why I think that the fundamental educational problem is not, in fact, a schooling problem. I think that it preexists that.
sure, but then I feel like I feel like this is kind of the conservative merry-go-round where it's like, what can we do to help with schools? So two of the things that I've seen, I think that are usually brought up in research is one is air conditioning, that children.
That's pretty good. I think because Destiny sort of gave him that, um, granted him that the problem isn't that is more heavily relied on like the family. I kind of thought like when he said that he was like fucked, but that's pretty smart to then say like, okay, well then what are you gonna do?
Children in hotter environments just don't learn as well. And then the second one is access to food. So like kids that are given like a breakfast or a lunch that's provided at school, like increases educational outcomes. Now I agree that neither of these things might be determinative in like, well, 20% of kids were graduating and now 80% of kids are graduating, or these kids are all going, you know, from with their GEDs into the workforce and now these kids are all suddenly becoming engineers. But in terms of where we can help, do you think there should be like some minimum threshold or minimum baseline of like, at the very least, every school should have a non-leaky gym, or every school should have, if children can't afford lunch or breakfast, like some sort of food provided, or every school should have these like base.
I think the graduation metric's not a very good metric to go by. I think that's pretty bad. You could have the same number of kids graduating, not see that number go up at all, but the quality of education that they're leaving with for the ones that do graduate, I think is way more important of a metric to look at. So that's weird that he leaned on that. I don't get that.
Baseline things.
So again, I'm going to quibble with the premise of the question, because I think that when it comes to, for example, food insecurity, school food programs, again, you can always pour money into any program and at the margins create change. I mean, there's no doubt that pouring money onto anything will create change in a marginal way. The question is, how large is the margin and how big is the movement, right? So the delta is what I'm looking at. And so I think that you're starting at a second order question, which is, what if we ignore what I would think are the big primary questions of education, namely family structure, value of education at home, how much you have parents who are capable or willing to help with homework, what are the incentive structures we can set up for a society that actually facilitate that, how local communities take ownership of their schools is a big one, right? All of these issues we're ignoring in favor of, say, air conditioning or lunch programs. And so in a vacuum, if you say air conditioning and lunch programs, sounds great in a vacuum. In terms of prioritization of values and cost structure, are those the things that I think are going to move the needle in a major way in terms of public policy? I do not. And in fact, I think that many of them end up being disproportionate wastes of money. I mean, I've talked before pretty controversially about the fact that an enormous amount of school lunch programs are thrown out. Like an enormous amount of that food ends up in the garbage can. Is there a better way to do that? If there is a better way to do it, then I'm perfectly willing to hear about that better way to do it. But it seems to me that one of the big flaws in the way that many people of the left approach government is, what if we hit every gnat with a hammer? And my question is, what if the gnat isn't even the problem? What if there is a much bigger substructure problem that needs to be solved in order to, if you're shifting deck chairs on the Titanic, sure, you can make the Titanic slightly more balanced because the deck chairs are slightly better oriented. But the real question is the water that's gaping into the Titanic, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. But again, I feel like we're on the conservative merry-go-round then of never wanting to address
That's not a conservative merry-go-round. I can give you 10 ways.
Well, sure, but so like here would be the merry-go-round. I would say that like there's a minimum funding for schools that I think would help children. And then we go, well, the thing that would help them the most is two-parent households. And I go, okay, well, two-parent households actually aren't the problem. The issue is access to things like birth control, so that people don't have children early on. And it's like, but the issue isn't actually birth control. The issue is actually you need a certain amount of money to move out early and to get married and then to have a two-parent household. So it's actually like economic opportunity.
No.
Well, it's not.
No, just two-parent households. That's
yeah,
it.
but like, what are the precursors?
Fuck people before you're married and have babies.
Sure,
Done.
that's great. We can say that and try to fight against, you know, however many hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. But people will have sex and people will make babies.
And then they used to get married. The vast majority of people in this country with kids used to be married. The vast majority of people with kids in this country now are not married increasingly. That is obviously a societal change. Something changed. It wasn't human evolution.
But a lot of those things in terms of resting on whether or not people get married have to do with financial decisions. Do you have the money?
People are worse off now than they were 50, 60 years ago when the marriage rates were higher.
People are delaying the start of their careers because education is going to be increasingly important.
So in other words, people are richer now and they have more education now, and yet they're having more babies out of wedlock now because they're richer and have more education.
I'm saying that one of the biggest indicators for whether or not somebody's willing to get married is how much money both people are making if they can move out of their household. People don't tend to want to get married at 22 when they've just finished college, when they don't have the money to move out and they can't afford a house.
Because we have changed the moral status of marriage in the culture, meaning that everyone, poor, rich, and in between, used to get married. That is, by the way, a huge percentage of marriages in the United States used to be what they would call shotgun marriages, meaning that somebody knocked somebody up, and because they did not want the baby to be born outside of a two-parent household, they would then get married.
Do we think that shotgun marriages, though, are a way to bring back equilibrium to education?
Yes.
That if we...
Yes.
Oh, man. Ben Shapiro's biting bullets left and right. This might be harder for Destiny than I thought.
Absolutely. Yes, 100%.
Do we
a
think
child
that...
deserves a mother and a father?
Sure.
Because that is the basis for all of this, including education.
Do we think that shotgun marriages are, well, let's say this. Do we think that that's a reasonable direction that society would ever take? Or is this like...
Yes, it was the reasonable direction for nearly all of modern
It
history.
was, but history moves in one direction, right?
Why?
because of time.
I mean, people don't think that's in what way is that?
Is, and I don't think we've ever
mean,
like
yes,
regressed social standards back to like, oh well, let's go 100 years back and do things that used to exist before. I
That's
think
weird.
things
The
like
entire left right now is arguing that we regress social standards by rejecting Roe versus Wade. So that's obviously not true.
the Roe versus Wade is not a social standard; it's a Supreme Court ruling. Number
Yes,
one.
but
Number
then-
two, what if you read the actual majority opinion on Roe v. Wade? We can see that socially, we actually never made huge progress on how society viewed abortion. This has always been an incredibly divisive thing, right? Even that was, I think, part of Alito's writing on it was that things like gay marriage, for instance, we've kind of moved past, and it's not really as debated anymore. But abortion was never a single topic, despite Roe v. Wade.
The
despite
notion that
Casey.
the arc of history constantly moves in one direction is belied by nearly all of the 20th century.
What do we mean by that?
I mean,
In
the
terms
first
of,
half
like,
of the
women's
20th
rights,
century is
civil
filled with
rights?
barbarism, communism, Nazism. All of that was a regression from what was happening at, for example, the beginning of the 19th century and the 20th century.
In what way?
Nazism and communism weren't a regression from what was going on in 1905.
These are, well, in terms of like communism being a regression, for instance, I'm not a communist, but like the industrialization of the Soviet Union happened under a communist society. The
So
industrialization,
the murder of tens
Sure,
of
it
millions of
did.
people.
Yeah, there's
I consider
obviously
that a regression.
there.
A
Sure,
moral regression, which is what we are talking about now, moral regression. And you're
You're-
suggesting that moral regression, I wouldn't term
Mhm.
a return to traditional values a moral regression, you would. But your suggestion is that history only moves in one direction, and I'm suggesting that history does not only move in one.
I think it's interesting, but it does have there's a little bit less room to comment in between than I thought there would be, but I'm working with what I got here.
One direction. It tends to move actually back and forth.
sure. I don't think that all of history moves in one.
The most interesting thing to me here is that I thought Destiny would be like way better off, but Ben Shapiro is actually doing like he's holding his own like way better than I would have expected him to here, which is maybe just me underestimating him.
One direction. There are going to be wars. There are going to be times of peace. I think in general, we're more peaceful now than we have been in the past. But I think when we look at the way that people live their lives, I think that we tend to move in a certain direction socially. So when it comes to things like racism or when it comes to things like slavery or women's rights, I think that there are two huge things that probably aren't changing in the US. And one is access to contraception and one is women working jobs. I think that these two things are probably huge things that are moving us off of shotgun marriages or getting married very early on. And I don't see those. Do you think that those two things are going to change fundamentally?
First of all, what the
United
data
States?
tend to show is that actually more highly educated people, as you were saying, tend
Mhm.
to get married more. So if the idea is that women getting an education somehow throws them off marriage, it's the opposite. Usually,
But those
it's women
women
who are
aren't
not
getting.
educated.
But
who are not
those women
getting
aren't
married.
getting shotgun marriages. Those women aren't having children.
Yeah,
when
but
they're
now
18,
you're
17.
shifting the topic. My topic was how to get more people married, and what I'm and then you suggested that higher levels of education are delaying marriage and making it less probable. And what I'm telling you, because this is what the data suggests, is that actually as you raise up the educational ladder, people tend to be married more than they are lower down on the educational ladder. If you're a high school graduate, you're less likely to be married than if you're a postdoc.
I agree with you, but that's because one of the biggest precursors to getting married is having like a level of economic stability. So as people get more educated, they obtain this economic stability, and then they're in a more comfortable position to explore more serious relationships.
There's another
and get married.
confound there. I mean, the confound is that
Mhm.
people in stable marriages tend to be the children of stable marriages. And there's only one way to break that cycle, which is to create a stable marriage. And that is something that is in everyone's hands. Again, this notion that it is somehow an unbreakable, unshatterable barrier to get married and have kids. I don't understand where this is coming from. Why is that such a challenge?
I
It's
don't
not
think
a
it's
challenge.
unbreakable or unshatterable. The initial point was for school, if we can provide a minimum level of educational stuff for children, that'd probably be good. But when we retreat back to, well, it has to be the families that are fixed first, fixing families is a multivariate
Listen,
problem that has
listen,
so many different.
I am
yeah.
fine within my local community. We all vote. Again, I've suggested that there's a difference between local community and federal.
Mhm.
I'm fine with my local community voting for school lunches or air conditioning or whatever it is that we all agreed to do, because the more local you get, the more homogeneity you get in terms of interest and the more interest you have in your neighbors. All of that's fine. I'm part of a very, very solid community. In our community, we give to each other. We have minimum standards of helping one another. All of that's wonderful. When it comes to the actual problem of education,
Mhm.
what I object to in the political sphere, and this happens all the time, is everybody is arguing on top of the iceberg about how we can move the needle 0.5 percentage points, as opposed to the entire iceberg melting beneath them. And we just ignore that. And we pretend that that's just, sort of the natural consequence of things. The arc of history suggests that people are never going to get married again. Well, I mean, actually, what the arc of history suggests, realistically speaking, is that the people who are not getting married are not going to be having kids. And what it also suggests, the people who are married are going to be having kids. And so the demographic profile actually over time is rather going to shift toward people who are having lots and lots of kids. I'm married. I have 4 kids. Everyone in my community is married. It's like minimum buy-in in my community is 4 kids. Okay, and so what's happening actually in terms of demographics is that the people who are more religious and getting married are having more kids. And so if you're talking about the arc of history shifting toward marriage, I would suggest that actually demographically over time, long periods of time, not over one generation, over long periods of time, the only cure for low birth rate is going to
Maybe this is just boring to me because Destiny's clearly holding back because he doesn't want to scare off Shapiro. He is being a lot more chill than normal. I'll give you that. I think so. I don't think that he doesn't want to scare off Shapiro. It's just that this time he's not. The main audience isn't DGG here, right? It's everybody else. He's putting himself like in front of the world, kind of, instead of just like his little corner of YouTube. So he's trying to be more professional. He wants to bring new people in with this, and the shit that DGG likes is not going to be the same thing that like broadly everybody's going to like. That's what I think.
Get married and have lots of kids.
I don't necessarily disagree with any of that, but I'm just saying that again on the. I know you're upset when I bring up the term merry-go-round. I think that there are good conversations to be had about people getting married because stable families produce stable children that are less likely to commit crime, that are more likely to go to school, that are more likely to be productive members of society, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to disagree with you on any of that. All of that is true. It's just frustrating that sometimes when you bring up any problem, all of it will circle back to other things that makes it seem like we can't make any progress in any area without like fixing
In
something.
what way? I mean, I literally just told you that on the local level, I'm fine for people voting for air
Yeah, but so
conditioning
for
and-
instance, on the local level, so for school funding is done, I think, generally per district. So what do you do when you have poor districts that can't afford air conditioner for their schools?
I mean, the idea there would be that presumably if the society, meaning the state, and I generally don't mean the federal state, I mean like the state of California, for example, decides that everybody ought to have air conditioning, people will vote for air conditioning, and that's perfectly legal. And I don't think there's anything morally objectionable about that per se.
Cool.
I also don't think that that's going to heal anything remotely like the central problem.
Sure,
and I
I
think that
agree.
what tends to happen in terms of government is people love arguing about the problems that can be solved by opening a wallet, and nobody likes to solve a problem by, you know, closing their sex life to one person, for example, or having kids within a stable religious community. Like the things that actually build society. I'm fine with arguing about each of these policies. And whether we apply them or not is a matter generally of pragmatism, not morality. It's a matter of incentive structures, not per se morality. Because incentive structures do have...
Oh, Lex, thank you very much. I appreciate it. This conversation reminded me that Destiny is Shapiro's son, basically. There's always a reason people call Destiny the left-wing Ben Shapiro. I think it's their style. They're both really aggressive. Yeah, Jesus, Lex, insane. It means the world to me. I really appreciate this. Your support is awesome. I have no way of ever paying you back for it, but it definitely means a lot. This is really weird to me because I think that Destiny is like, he's pulled back his like debate aggression like significantly. Ben Shapiro isn't as aggressive as he normally is either, but he's not afraid to kind of like throw his like he's like pretty jabby with it. He's still doing his thing a lot more than Destiny's doing his thing. And if this keeps up throughout the rest of the debate, I think that I think it's gonna hurt Destiny a lot because like you said already, I've seen a couple times where Ben's made points where I'm like, oh, that's gonna be pretty hard with where Destiny's presented himself for him to get past. And also like the bullet biting on Ben Shapiro's part has been phenomenal. And I think that leaves Destiny like a lot less room to navigate. And if he's not gonna be able to, if Destiny doesn't feel like he can just call him out and be like, no, come on, like, fuck you. Like, you don't think that, if he doesn't bring that to anything, then he can't win. If Ben Shapiro is willing to bite a bunch of bullets and Destiny isn't going to be willing to call him out like he does with like literally everybody else, I think Destiny's in trouble.
You know, moral underpinnings. There's such a thing as, for example, if you're going to use a welfare program, you have to decide how effective it is, to what crowd it applies, where the cutoffs are. Does it disincentivize work? Does it not?
Yeah.
All of these are
I
pragmatic concerns. But on a moral level, the generalized objection that I have to people on the left side of the aisle is that they like to focus in these conversations.
Destiny to bring some of his unique energy to this conversation because like the average person who sees this doesn't already know who Destiny is. They're not going to walk away feeling like they saw someone that interesting by comparison. Um, yeah, Destiny doesn't feel like Destiny right now. Like we're still pretty early on into this. There's a lot of time for him to change. There's still almost like 2 full hours to go. So I really hope that like if Destiny doesn't bring that Destiny energy to this, I'm gonna walk away pretty disappointed myself. Because I think that the way that he normally debates is actually would be pretty good and effective against Ben Shapiro. That's why this is like an exciting debate to see. And if he's just going to go like point by point, like academically against Ben Shapiro, it's going to be. I think that it just works in Ben Shapiro's favor.
Conversations very often it feels as though
That's what Ben Shapiro's used to. Ben Shapiro's not used to debating somebody like Destiny. So if Destiny's going to let him have what, like if he's going to put it and keep it in Ben Shapiro's comfort zone, um, then Destiny's just in trouble. There's no way around it. He has to be
it's
different.
conversation with people who are drunk searching under the lamp for their keys. The problems they want to look at are the problems that are solvable by government. And then all the problems they don't want to look at, which are the actual giant monsters lurking in the dark and not particularly solvable by government, are the ones they want to ignore and assume are just the natural state of things. And I don't think that's correct at all.
And I 1 billion% agree. And then obviously my criticism for the conservative side is the exact opposite, where there are parts where government could remedy some issues. For instance, children having sex with each other and producing other children out of wedlock. Like sometimes having after-school programs is nice to prevent that. Like I didn't have time for these things when I was in school. I was doing football practice. I was doing cross-country practice. I went in early for a band. I agree with you that sometimes people only focus on one end of the problem. I hate to be that guy, but as somebody that have you ever watched The Wire?
Sure.
I'm not going to cite The Wire as real life example, but like obviously there's only so much you can do in a school when the children coming in are so beyond destroyed because of the family life and everything prior to them even getting to school that day. So I agree. Government is not like the solution to broken families. That would never be the case.
And it's actually not the solution to education, depending on the kind of solutions that you're talking about. Some solutions, yes. Some solutions, no.
Yeah.
So
the only thing I'm looking at is, as I said earlier, just like these minimum threshold things where it's like, where can government make? Because you mentioned marginal, which I think is a really good way to look at things. There's marginal cost and marginal utility to things, where the first $1,000 per student you spend might give you a huge return, but the extra 20,000 after is just
I think these are all pragmatic discussions.
Sure, of
and
course. Okay.
Actually, this is what we used to hash out in legislatures before they turned into platforms for people grandstanding. But yes.
Sure. Okay, yeah.
As we descend from the heavens of philosophical discussion of conservatism and liberalism, let's go to the pragmatic muck of politics. Trump versus Biden. Between the two of them, who was in their first?
If Destiny doesn't come out strong in this part, I would say there's no hope for him. And I just realized too, I didn't think that I really had had it in my head how I wanted it to go until just now. But like I probably should have known this. Like I want Destiny to win this. I like Destiny a lot more than I like Ben Shapiro. I think Ben Shapiro is really interesting. I think a lot of his clips are like funny and stuff. But like if I have to pick one or the other, like who do you like want to win? Who do you have more of a stake in winning? It's Destiny for me. So I want him to win. And right now, in regards to that, I feel like he's making me nervous.
Term, the better president, and thus who should win if the two of them are in fact our choices, should win a second term in 2024. Ben?
Sure. So in terms of actual job performance, you have to separate it into a few categories. In terms of actual performance in foreign policy, I think Trump's foreign policy record is significantly better than Biden's, the world being on fire right now being a fairly good example of that. And we can get into each aspect of the world being on fire and where the incentive structures came from and how all of that happened in a moment. When it comes to the economy, I think that Trump's economic record was better than Biden's. Doesn't mean he didn't overspend. He did. He wildly overspent. But he also had a very solid record of job creation. A huge percentage of the game.
I'm sorry. One second. My drink's gone. I'm gonna grab another drink. I don't want to be distracted. Okay.
Gains in the economy went to people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. Actually, the gross income to the average American rose about $6,000 during his term. The unemployment rates were very, very low before COVID. I think that you almost have to separate the Trump administration into sort of before COVID and during COVID, because COVID obviously is a sort of a black swan event, the most signal change in politics in our lifetime. And so governance during COVID is almost its own category, which we can discuss. But in terms of foreign policy, in terms of domestic policy, I think that Trump was significantly better than Biden has been, and that's on the upside for Trump. On the downside for Biden, obviously, you're talking 40-year highs in inflation. You're talking about savings being eaten away. You're talking about everything being 20 to 30% more expensive. You're talking about massive increases to the deficit, even at a rate that was unknown under Trump. The deficit under Trump raised by about a little under $1 trillion every year up until 2020. Again, 2020 was COVID year, so everybody decided that we're going to fire hose money at things. But then Joe Biden continued to fire hose money at things in 21, 22, and 23. That obviously is, in my opinion, bad economic policy. And then you get to the rhetoric, and you get to the stuff that Donald Trump says. And as I've said before, my view is that on Donald Trump's epitaph, on his gravestone, it will say Donald Trump. He said a lot of shit. I think that Donald Trump does say a lot of things. I think that that is basically baked into the cake, which is why everyone who's bewildered by the polls is ignoring human nature, which is at the beginning, when you see something very shocking, it's very shocking. And then
I seen your message, like, but it's my bro Shapiro knows about Mr. Girl and Laugh LMAO. Could you imagine if he brought that up? Oh my God.
if you see it over and over and
That-
over and
that
over
would
for years
be-
on end, it is no longer shocking. It is just part of the
That'd be
background
pretty
noise,
wild.
like tinnitus. It just becomes, something that your brain adjusts for. And so, do I like a lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric? No, and I never have. Do I think that that is dispositive as to his presidency? No, I do not. When it comes to Biden, again, I think he's underperforming economically. I think that his foreign policy has been really a problem. Even the things I think he's done right are, I think, band-aids for things that he created by doing wrong. And when it comes to his own rhetoric, you can argue that it's grading on a curve because Trump was coming in with such wild rhetoric that just a maintenance of that wild rhetoric doesn't really change, again, the baseline. For Biden, he came in the same way that Obama did, on the sort of soaring rhetoric of American unity. I'm the president for all. Like Trump came in, and he's like, listen, I'm the president for what I am, and I'm going to say the things I want to say. I'm beyond the toilet, and I'm tweeting. We're like, okay, so that's what it is. With Biden, he came in with, I'm a president for all Americans. I'm trying to unify everybody, and that pretty quickly broke down into a lot of oppositional language about his political opponents, in particular, an attempt to lump in, for example, huge swaths of the conservative movement with the people who participated, for example, in January 6th or who are fans of January 6th. The sort of lumping in of everybody into MAGA Republicans who wasn't personally signed on to an infrastructure bill with him. That sort of stuff, I think, has been truly terrible. I thought his Philadelphia speech was truly terrible. And again, I think that you do have the problem of he is no longer capable of, certainly rhetorically, unifying the country when every speech from him feels like watching Nick Wallenda walk across a volcano on a tightrope. I mean, it really is like you're just sort of waiting for him to fall. I mean, it's
this is the thing I was talking about yesterday too. It feels like the main thing that people have against Biden are just sort of like these cheap shots that are like super easy to take, but ultimately they don't. Either they're made up or they're not really a criticism on him being the president. Like, is the president not like tripping and falling really like a main thing that we care about? I don't think it is for almost anybody.
It's sad to say. I mean, the other day, he was
frustrating.
speaking for what was, in effect, his campaign kickoff, and this is in Valley Forge. And I mean, Jill rushed up there, like as soon as he was done, Jill rushed up there, like she'd been shot out of a cannon to come and try and guide him away so he didn't become the Shane Gillis Roomba. And that's not really,
Shane
let's put it
Gillis
this way,
reference.
It does not quiet the soul to watch Joe Biden rhetorically. Again, that's a different problem than Trump's problem, but that's my analysis.
This is one of the areas where when we get into this, I don't understand if there's like brain breaking happening or what's going on. I don't know what world we can ever live in where we say that Trump is less divisive for the country than Biden. I think it is so patently obvious. Trump is so divisive. Like, not only does Trump make an enemy out of every person in the opposition party, he makes an enemy out of his own party and every single person around him. Like, we all watched him bully, Jeff Sessions. We all watched him bully his own party on Twitter. We all watched like all of these people walk away from him. Even recently, I think the Secretary of Defense Esper and John Kelly, the Chief of Staff, were saying, I think Trump is a threat to democracy. You've got all of his prior people that were around him, some of his closest allies. You've got Bill Barr that won't co-sign a single thing that he says. You've got
all of that changes once he's in office, though. These are, I think, extremely good talking points up until that point. if Shapiro doesn't point out that everybody was against Trump until he was elected, then I would say that's a
All these people that he used to work with that
bad on
all
him.
say Trump is a horrible, evil person. He is ineffective as a leader. He doesn't accomplish anything, and he didn't. To say that Biden has failed at bipartisanship when we've gotten the CHIPS Act, we've gotten the IRA, we've gotten the ARP, we've gotten the bipartisan infrastructure bill, when we've gotten like all this major legislation that is working in this historically divided Congress, as opposed to Trump that got us tax cuts and deficit spending. I don't understand where we ever are in this world where Biden is somehow more divisive than Trump. Even the speeches that Ben is bringing up, they always bring up. I remember that one. I think we might have even done it on our episode. The one speech that Biden gave, where at one point the background is red, and
That's the Philly
Republicans
speech
were
I
like,
referenced. Yeah.
yeah, and they're like, oh my God, it's over. This is the end. And then meanwhile, you got Donald Trump, coming into office saying things like, if you burn the flag, you should have your citizenship revoked, or talking about DNC, that I'm going to investigate every single one of these media organizations for corruptness. I'm going to open the libel and defamation laws. I'm going to take all of these guys to court. You've got this weird Project 2025 stuff where is it John Paschal, I think, is talking about, we're gonna investigate all of these people, and we're gonna try to throw crimes at all these people. Trump is like the most divisive president I think we've ever had in at least in my lifetime of being an American citizen. And the rhetoric from him is just, it's on a whole other level in terms of the demonization of political opponents. I mean, this is a guy that's known for giving his political opponents bad nicknames, right? Like that's what Trump does. Like it's funny, but even as a resident of Florida, if Florida had another natural disaster, do you think Trump would withhold aid? Because you had, I think that was one of the few nice things that DeSantis actually said about Biden, was that like, hey, listen, when the buildings collapsed in, I think that was in Miami Beach, yeah, that, for the hurricane stuff, that Biden was there. He was saying, if you guys need aid, however many billions, you can have it. Meanwhile, Trump, I think, was threatening to withhold federal funding from blue states that wouldn't, I think it had to do with the National Guard stuff, the deployment of the National Guard, that they weren't like doing enough for the riots, and Trump was threatening to withhold aid from some of these blue states. Trump is literally the most divisive person in the world. I don't see how on any metric he is ever succeeding.
Shapiro
in the divisive
laughed, Destiny
category.
wins.
In terms of the economy, I do think it's funny that Republicans are very keen to say that, like, well, we can't really grade Trump, post COVID, because obviously COVID messed everything up, which is fair. But pre COVID, what did Trump do? Yeah, he did deficit spending, tax cuts. He presided over historic low interest rates and an economy that was already like blazing past the final years of Obama. We were posting all-time highs on all the stock markets in 2013 onwards. Unemployment rates were falling. Now under Biden, unemployment rates are even lower than they were under Trump. But it sucks that for Trump, we can say, well, we can't really hold him accountable for 2020. That was COVID. Well, all we have for Biden is post-COVID. We don't have any pre-COVID Biden, economy. And it was the same thing for Obama too, coming in right after the housing collapse as well. And it sucks that Republicans are able to walk out of office, having burned the entire American society to the ground economically. And now we've got to try to evaluate, okay, well, what did Obama do during his first 2 to 3 to 4 years, just trying to recover from where the housing crash left it? And then we look at Biden now, who's trying to recover from COVID, and now we're grading him on a totally different scale than what Trump is being graded on. Yeah, that sucks, I think.
We can comment on the foreign policy.
On the foreign policy, I'm going to be honest. I am very liberal. I'm very not progressive. I'll probably come off as more hawkish than others because I'm not a big fan of this. Which also, if Ben agrees, like I think people like Trump are going to be the most dovish isolationist people ever. They don't want to do anything internationally. They just want to, protect America, be at home, protect our economy, don't do anything internationally, which is why he was constantly undermining NATO and constantly, attacking all of the European Union and, cheering on the UK for Brexiting away from the EU. I think that being said, I think that Biden has done a phenomenal job when it comes to foreign policy. I think that the coalition building was so important for Ukraine, Russia, and I'm so happy that he decided to go to our European allies and our NATO allies and try to build a coalition of people to help Ukraine so that that wasn't only the United States. Personally, especially after doing a whole bunch of research, I do tend to side with Israel over Palestine in a lot of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. I'm glad that Biden, while remaining a staunch defender of Israel, is trying to rein in some of the more aggressive posturing towards the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I'm proud that Biden said, hey, listen, we're going to delay some of these attacks. Hey, listen, we are going to allow humanitarian aid here. Hey, listen, we are going to try to, not kill as many Palestinian people down there, while still, signaling that he would be a staunch supporter of of Israel in the conflict, assuming the civilian casualties don't go too high. For foreign policy, I mean, blemishes. I mean, the biggest one you can give to Biden is Afghanistan and the pullout there. But man, are we
No.
going to talk about, the Inspector General report that says that one of the biggest reasons why the Afghanistan pullout was so disastrous was because of the Doha Accords, where Donald Trump headed talks that didn't even include the Afghanistan army? I mean, like these were disasters. Like when Biden took office, we had 20.
I still don't accept that talking point. I think that it was always going to be bad. There was always going to be bad things associated with pulling out, but we've been there so long. Everybody wanted us out of there. And just because it didn't go, like, because there wasn't like parades in the street with how amazing everything was when we pulled out, I don't think that that makes Biden at fault for it. I always found that to be a really silly talking point.
500
There we
troops
go.
left in Afghanistan. Like, what was the options even afforded to Biden at that point? Obviously, you've got the abandonment of the Kurds in northern Syria, for the Turkish armies to lay waste to. You talk about Iran and North Korea, although I'm not sure where Ben would land on those. But yeah, that's broadly. Yeah,
Well, that's a lot from both.
There's a lot,
You
yeah.
want to pick at something where you disagree with here?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. So,
Mhm.
I mean, so I want to ask a few questions on each one of these.
Oh, thank you, ladies.
So let's talk about divisiveness
Mhm.
for a second. So there's no one who can make the case that Donald Trump is not divisive.
Yeah.
Of course, he's incredibly
Okay.
divisive. It's a given.
Well, that's good.
Do you treat Biden's rhetoric with the same level of seriousness that you treat Trump's rhetoric? Or I should probably put that the other way around. Should we treat Trump's rhetoric with the same level of seriousness as Joe Biden or, say, Barack Obama's rhetoric?
I'm going to try to be concise when I say these. Broadly speaking, especially in studying Israel, Palestine, and Ukraine, Russia, I try not to take politicians at their word because sometimes they just say stuff to say stuff. I understand that. But broadly speaking, I'm going to look at the rhetoric and the actions, and I am going to grade them the same. So, yes, I would hold Biden and Trump to the same standard.
Right. So my feeling is, and this is one area where, for clarification, we're going to have a division, is that I, of course, don't treat Trump's rhetoric in the same way that I treat Biden's or Obama's. He's utterly uncalibrated and he says whatever he wants to at any given time, and it doesn't even match up with his policy very often.
Can I ask you, like, for our head of state, our chief executive, shouldn't rhetoric be arguably one of the most important things that he does?
I mean, the answer would be yes. And now I've been given a choice between a person who I think in calibrated ways says things that are divisive and a person who in uncalibrated ways says things that are divisive. And so the evidence that Joe Biden is divisive is every poll taken since essentially August of 2021. He is, by all available metrics, incredibly divisive. A huge percentage of Americans are deeply unhappy, not only with his performance, but don't believe he's a uniter. That's just the reality. And that may just be a reflection. I mean, honestly, we may be putting too much on Trump or Biden personally. It may just be that the American people themselves are rhetorically divided because of social media, and social media can, in fact, be a cesspool. And all
one
of that.
thing that I would ask you about that, though,
Sure.
is I agree, especially when you look at the favorability. But sometimes when I look at these polls, when you start to disaggregate them by party, I wonder if it's actually, is Biden historically divisive, or I'm trying to think of a really polite way to say this. The people that like Trump worship Trump. I don't know. Like, one of the most prescient things that Trump could have probably ever said was that I could kill someone on Fifth Street and nobody would hold me accountable. So is it really that Biden is historically divisive, or is it that every single Trump supporter will always say that Trump is great and always say that Biden is bad?
The reason I would say that Biden is, in fact, historically divisive is because Republicans felt much more strongly about Barack Obama than Joe Biden, actually.
But they didn't feel as strongly about Trump as they did about, like, Romney or McCain. Right.
In what way? I mean,
and
like,
the allegiance to Trump.
Oh no, there's certainly more allegiance to Trump than there is to Romney or McCain, largely because Trump won in 2016. But beyond,
It's because of how fanatical his base is. We've never had a president have the kind of support that Trump has had, ever. He doesn't have like supporters. He has devotees.
on that, the point that I'm making is that if you're looking at the stats in terms of divisiveness, Republicans always find the Democratic president divisive. The question is where the rest of the country is. And right now,
That is true. I just talked about the other day. Obama wearing a tan suit was like a Fox News scandal. Him not having an American flag on his lapel was a Fox News scandal. Fox News scandal when Obama wore a fucking helmet to ride his bike. Everything's a big deal. It's not even a left versus right thing too. Even Donald Trump got like a lot of shit that just didn't matter. Part of my biggest problem with the left when it came to Trump was that every single thing that Trump did was like a crisis, and it just made it to where nothing that people on the left could complain about felt like it mattered because well, everything's a disaster, so why were we even going to listen to you? Like, I got tired of it. 'Cause, like, but do I really need to care about the thing that you're mad about right now, or is this just you freaking out because Trump exists?
A lot of Democrats who either
Gotta
don't
pick
agree
our
with
battles.
Biden or find him divisive. There are a lot of independents who find him divisive. So when we're comparing these things, I don't think they're leagues apart in terms of the divisive effects of what they say.
Do you
Right,
think-
and I'm separating that off from like the inherent content of what they say, because obviously what Trump says is more divisive just on like the raw level. I mean, if he's insulting people as opposed to Joe Biden doing MAGA Republicans, like if I were an alien come down from space and look at these two statements, I'd say this one's more divisive than this one.
Mhm.
But then there's the reality of being a human being in the world, and that is everyone has baked Donald Trump into the cake. And Joe Biden, again, started off with a patina of being non-divisive and now has
Patina?
emerged as divisive. If you don't mind, I actually want to get to the foreign policy questions because this one is actually slightly less interesting to me.
Sure.
But
Well, can
you're
I?
free to
Yeah,
answer.
just,
Sure, go for
just
it.
one quick thing, I guess. Like, because we can say the reality of it, and we can look at opinion polls. What if we look at like legislative accomplishments? Like Biden is working on a 50-50 divided Senate. Donald Trump had both houses of Congress and the Supreme
It's
Court,
pretty good.
and got like no major legislation passed.
Well,
Like,
I mean, he did lose Congress in 2018, but
sure, but prior to that, because we got the infrastructure bill, I think, in 1 year, which Trump promised for his entire presidency, didn't get anywhere on it.
I mean, yes, his Republican base was not in favor of mass spending on infrastructure, and neither am I. So there's that. I think that's
Sure.
mostly a state and local
But they
issue.
were in favor of mass spending for tax cuts.
That's not a spending. I mean,
Effectively, it is, right? Like,
effectively, it's not.
well, if you're cutting tax receipts, but you're not changing the level of spending, like Biden did with the IRA.
I mean,
the
again, we have a fundamental philosophical difference here. I think that when the government takes my money,
Mhm.
that is not the government somehow being more fiscally responsible. And when the government allows me to keep my money, I don't see that as the government spending. I see that as my money, and the government is taking less of it.
That's great, but at the end of the day, the government is still going to be in a deficit spending, and they're going to have to borrow money from the treasury.
Right. We have a spending problem. In
Yeah.
other words, not a receipts problem. Is the
Sure.
case that I'm making.
Sure.
The problem with Donald Trump is not that he lowered.
Saving money is the same as making money. I hope that Destiny doesn't let him get away with this.
Taxes. The United States has one of the most progressive tax systems on the planet, and in fact, if
And so not taking money is the same as spending money as well.
you wish to
But
have a
it's
European-style social welfare state, what you actually need is to tax the middle class to death. I mean, the reality is that the top 20% of the American population pays literally all net taxes in the United States after state benefits and all of this.
Sure.
So if you actually wanted to have the kind of social welfare state that many liberals seem to want to have, like Northern Europe, for example, you'd actually have to tax people who make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000.
And I don't want
very
that.
high-
I agree with that. But
So-
how do you explain the lack of legislation
I mean,
if he's like such a uniter?
because I think the Republican Party itself is quite divided, and I think that Trump's.
But isn't that his
Can't-
job? He's the head of the Republican Party. He's the Republican president of the United States.
I mean, again, I don't think that Joe Biden has passed wildly historic legislation.
the
other
infrastructure
than,
bill was the largest. Like,
so here's the
yeah.
problem: if you're a Republican,
Uh-huh.
the only bills that you can get consensus on tend to be bills that either that let's be real about this, that are tax cuts
Mhm.
because, as you would, I think, agree with,
Mhm.
when it comes to polling data, Americans constantly say they want to cut the government, and then the minute you ask them which program, they have
They
no
don't
idea
wanna
what
cut
they're
anything, of
right.
course.
Exactly, and so it's much harder to come up with a bill to cut things than it is to come up with a bill to add things. Which is why spending was out of control under Trump as well. But there are some Republicans who still don't want to spend on those things, right? So inherently, the task that this goes back to the first question. The task that Republicans think government is there to do is different than the task that Democrats think that government is there to do. So the way that the very metric of success for a Democratic president versus a Republican president, namely, for example, pieces of legislation passed, as a Republican, one of my goals is to pass nearly no legislation because I don't actually want the government involved in more areas of our life. I want to ask a couple questions on the foreign policy
Sure.
front.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. Real quick. Just so, for instance, like Donald Trump wanted to punish China, and he wanted to bring microprocessor manufacturing.
Ben Shapiro's kind of nod is very much how I feel right now. There's
the
really
United
not a
States.
whole lot to
Biden did that with legislation,
at
with the
here.
CHIPS Act. You talk about like spending being out of control, and I mean, I can agree with that. I think anybody that looks at the numbers has to agree with that. But why not pass legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, which is at least like spending neutral, right? Like, why are there not bills where Donald Trump could take?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that whenever the government says something is spending neutral, it rarely materializes that way. That is not going to be a spending neutral bill.
Sure,
on
but
the
there's a
Inflation
difference
Reduction
between
Act
like
discussion.
at least they say it's spending neutral versus this is a $500 billion bill over like 10 years.
I mean,
right?
well, But again, I don't see a tax
This
cut
is
as a
not
matter of
good.
quote spending neutrality. The big problem is they keep spending, not that they are allowing me to keep the money that I earned and they did not earn. But
Okay, so then just to understand, so if somebody just did massive like reductions in tax receipts, so tax cut after
Yes.
tax cut after tax cut, but they didn't change spending at all, you wouldn't consider that like an increase in deficit spending or out of control spending. You would just say they're just tax cuts.
no, the opposite. I would consider it a wild. I would consider it a wild overspending.
Okay.
Meaning
So then
that,
was it under Trump then when he did the tax?
I mean, the deficit spending, by
2017?
the way, under Biden is way worse than it was under.
Of course, but we're in post-COVID, right?
COVID ended effectively. I mean, you live in Florida. COVID effectively ended in the state of Florida by the middle of 2021.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
even if you're a
worldwide,
vaccine
like
fan, by like April, May of 2021, there was wide availability of vaccines, whether or not you like the vaccines.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were done.
I
mean,
agree, but
and-
like we're in a post, like how many trillions of dollars have been dumped in worldwide that are like leading to inflation, right? The inflation is like a worldwide issue right now because of the economy shutting down for a year or two. It's not like those effects are gone in 1 year, right? COVID might be gone, but the after effects of all the stimulus spending and the unemployment. and
good.
everything
the
else-
definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So pouring more money on top of that makes for more inflation. That's what it does.
Sure, I agree. But like there's also the definition of when do you deficit spend is when economies are headed for recessions, right? Rather than when economies are doing really well, like they were under Trump and he was deficit spending, whereas Biden can at least make the argument that I ought to be deficit spending because the economy is heading for potential
So,
recession. Right?
so here's the thing. I don't think that the economy was actually headed for recession. In fact, if you look at the economic
Every
statistics,
economist said that it was.
No,
Every
it-
economist.
okay,
They're
it
still
was-
saying that there's like a recession coming, right?
right?
So
But that was largely because of the after effects of inflation. Meaning, if you inflate the economy, what you're going to end up doing is bursting a bubble, and then when that bubble bursts, you'll get a recession. I mean, that was the basic idea, right? The question was whether you're going to get a soft landing. But if you actually look at, for example, the employment statistics or the economic growth statistics in the United States, what they look like under the last year's Obama and then Trump. I mean, this is what the chart looks like. Is it looks like this, and then it hits March of 2020, it goes like that.
Yeah.
Right, and then by like September, it bounces back up. Right, it's a V-shaped recovery, and then it starts to peter out.
sure,
and
a
then
lot
what
because
it's
of the American Recovery Plan, right? That Biden did as well.
I mean,
4 million jobs. Yeah.
no, I don't. I'm not going to attribute it to that because the rates of growth.
There's a
in-
little
in
bit-
job growth.
There was a little bit of the destiny that we're used to seeing when he's not debating Shapiro.
September, October, November were actually very similar to the rates of job growth after Joe Biden took office. What you see is actually kind of a straight line. I mean, what the chart looks like. In any case, okay. So
Yeah, sorry.
on the foreign
Let's
policy
get-
stuff, this is getting abstruse. But on the foreign policy stuff, so the questions that I have
Mhm.
with regard to Biden on foreign policy, very very simple question.
Mhm.
Do you think that the situation in the Middle East is better now than it was under Donald Trump?
Probably. That's a hard one. The factors
Why?
that I'm making right now are like obviously you've got the Israel-Palestinian war that's going on right now, which is kind of bad. But like broadly speaking, I'm not sure how much that affects the Middle East as much as like the collapse of Syria. 2013 Syrian civil war sent millions of immigrants throughout all of Europe, and
Which was
that-
under
which was under Obama and continued
Right.
under Trump. Trump didn't do anything to alleviate any of the Syrian civil war. In terms,
why
like,
did Syria end up as a preserve of Russia again?
how did Syria end up as a preserve of Russia?
Yes. Why did it end up being essentially a client state of Russia?
I know that Putin enjoys access to the ports down there. I don't know. You tell me.
I mean, the reason is because Barack Obama suggested that there was a red line that would be drawn in the face of chemical weapons use. Bashar Assad then used chemical
Sure.
weapons in Syria, and Barack Obama was unwilling to then essentially create consequences for Syria in the form of any sort of Western strike. And so instead he outsourced it to Russia. This is 2013, 2014.
Sure.
Right,
Do you
so
think
the-
there might have been some hesitancy after like seeing how Libya ended up that maybe us like intervening
Who was
hardcore?
president during Libya?
Obama?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, so
Sure, but what does that have to do with anything? Though? I'm just
I mean,
saying that,
the-
like there
the-
might have been like a mistake
the
learned.
point that I'm making
like,
is that actually the Middle East, I mean, just historically speaking, was historically good under Donald Trump. I mean, it's very difficult to make the case.
That doesn't
either
mean it was
before
good
or
with Donald
after
Trump, though.
were better than during Donald Trump.
was
Like,
it
this
good?
is
I
an
mean,
area of
the
yes.
Syrian. I don't think that Trump contributed.
Tritium, I agree that it is interesting, but I feel like it should be more interesting than it's been so far. So I'm hoping it kicks up a bit.
to the Syrian situation. And
I think Destiny needs to stop treating Ben with such a light touch.
improving much. I think
I mean,
that
he
caught
wrecked
a lot of.
ISIS. He did
what?
wreck ISIS, which was in the.
I mean,
was in
ISIS
the
had been
east
getting
of Syria.
wrecked by the Kurds in Iraq, by every single person, by Assad's
there's
army, by
why-
Putin, by Turkey. Literally everybody was fighting against ISIS at that point.
There's a spike in violence, and then
Mhm.
the Trump. I mean, you get credit for when you're president, presumably. I mean, things got better with ISIS under Trump.
I mean, yeah, they did. I mean,
Things got
were-
worse with ISIS under Obama.
they- for sure.
He called them the
considering that-
JV squad,
Sure.
and then they became not the JV squad.
Yeah, but
and
I
then
don't
they
know
were
if
ended under
ISIS is
Trump.
originating in Syria and Baghdadi, and all of the growth of that is necessarily Obama's fault. I know that we like to say that Obama created ISIS. I don't know if you say that, but I've heard that saying a lot. I think that's a little bit simplistic. I don't think that when,
Sure.
when I'm looking at like actions that presidents have taken, the biggest criticism I have for like Middle Eastern policy is I think the Doha Accords were a disaster, and I think that's like one of the biggest blemishes that we have right now. I would also argue that moving the embassy to Jerusalem was also kind of silly, and arguably contributed to some of the conflict we see right now
No,
between
it's
Israel
actually.
and
So I'll
Palestine.
argue precisely the opposite,
ahead.
especially given the fact that after the
What?
movement of the embassy to Jerusalem, the Abraham
That's what. Oh,
Accords continued to sign and actually expand, and that if Donald Trump had been elected, I have no doubt in my mind that Saudi Arabia would now be a part of the Abraham Accords. In fact, that was basically pre-negotiated. And then when Joe Biden took office, Joe Biden took a very anti-Saudi stance on a wide variety of issues.
I think that moving the embassy to Jerusalem was pretty aggressive. It's hard for me to believe that that's not universally accepted.
The biggest single effect in the Middle East of Joe Biden's presidency, and again, I agree with you that not every foreign policy issue can be laid at the hands of a president. Joe Biden's main approach to the Middle East was very similar to the Obama approach, which is why the Middle East was chaotic under Obama and chaotic under Biden. And that was to alienate allies like Saudi Arabia and Israel, and instead to try to make common cause or cut deals with Iran. What that did is incentivize terrorism from Iran. What we're watching in the Middle East is Iran attempting to use every one of its terror proxies in the Middle East, and it was specifically launched in an attempt to avoid what Biden actually was trying to do, which was good, which was after 2 years of failure with Saudi Arabia, try to bring them into the Abraham Accords, right? That was what was burgeoning at the end of last year, and Iran saw that, and Iran decided that they were going to throw a grenade into the middle of those negotiations by essentially activating Hamas. Hamas activates, Hamas commits October 7th. Israel, as a sovereign nation state, has to respond to the murder of 1,200 of its citizens and the taken kidnapping of 240. Israel has to do that not only to go after its own hostages and try to restore them, but also to reestablish military deterrence in the most violent region of the world. Hezbollah gets active on Israel's northern border. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. They get active on the northern border. The Houthis in Yemen get active. These are all the only reason all this is happening at the same time is because Iran is doing this, right? And not just that, they are threatening global shipping.
Sure.
If you're talking about the effects of global supply lines, which I totally agree had a major inflationary effect on the economy thanks to COVID, right now the cost of shipping is nearly double what it was just a few weeks ago, and that is because a ragtag group of Houthi barbarians are attacking international shipping and forcing everybody to stop using the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, instead going around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. All of that is the result of the fact that Joe Biden reoriented the United States in the very early days in favor of a more pro-Iranian stance. He appointed Robert Malley to negotiate the Iran deal, who, as it turns out, was using proxies. Many of his aides were actually taking money from Iran. The Biden administration, literally one of their first acts was to delist the Houthis as a terror organization and end sanctions against the Houthis. These are all moves that Biden made very early on. They were disastrous moves. But when it comes to domestic policy, I think he hasn't been nearly as damaging on domestic policy as he has been on foreign policy.
Sure. So just on a couple of Middle Eastern things. So one of the big things that threw the Middle East into disaster was what we are all traumatized by it now, was the Iraq invasion, which happened under a Republican president.
Sure.
Agree with that, right?
Sure.
Yes. The deposition of Saddam Hussein and everything that followed after probably contributed more to the growth of ISIS and the destabilization of that entire region, probably more than anything else. I think that prior to Bush, for Clinton, and even at the beginning of Bush's presidency, we were on some kind of road to normalcy with Iran, which I think has to happen, whether we like them or not, until Bush, for whatever reason, decides to throw Iran into the axis of evil.
And I need some evidence that we were on a road to normalcy with Iran in the 1990s.
We do in the wait, what?
That we were on a road to normalcy with Iran in the 1990s.
My understanding is that, from the late 90s and prior to the axis of evil labeling of Iran, that there was going to be some path forward to where we could start to normalize relationships with them.
I find that very difficult to believe, and I don't see a lot of evidence. I mean, we can just disagree on that.
Sure.
But,
okay. Yeah. Sure. We can disagree on that, but I know that once they
by
got
the way,
thrown into
the after effects. Just quick note: the after effect of the Iraq War that was the most devastating was the increase in power of Iran.
I agree. Yeah, because of the destabilization
Yes.
of Iraq and Iraq not having a government there that was functional for at least a decade,
and was in fact a Sunni
also
government, right? Originally, it was a Sunni government. Disbanding the Sunni army was one of the worst things that the Bush administration did.
Banning all the former Ba'ath parties,
sectarian,
yes. Yeah, all horrible under a Republican president. But
don't disagree.
That that probably contributed more to ISIS, to the growth of power in Iran, maybe even to the destabilization of Syria, probably more than anything that Obama did. Also, when we look at Iran funding people in the region, I don't disagree with that as well. I think Iran is the #1 instigator of bad guy things right now in the Middle East. Iran, the
Bad guy
IRGC, I
things.
supported when Donald Trump killed Soleimani. I think that was a great thing. I think that Iran is a major problem. However, I don't know if the path forward is constantly being a belligerent to Iran or trying to figure out some road to normalcy. I don't know if the collapse of Iran or the destruction of that country, considering how unpopular the Ayatollah even is there. Like the citizens of Iran, I don't think are big supporters of the government there. I feel like moving on a path where, let's do our nuclear inspections. We had that Iranian nuclear deal that Trump pulled out of. Let's do the nuclear inspections. Make sure you're not on a way to nuclear weapons. Let's unfreeze some funds. Let's move in some direction where we get on a good term with you. I feel like that's the most important thing that needs to happen in the Middle East. As much as people like to
I think Destiny's right. I think that it's probably important to bring up that we completely let like Iraq if we completely let it collapse, then what's gonna take its place? Usually in the Middle East, when a big power falls, what takes its place is going to be equally, if not even more, like brutal and ruthless, because that's like the means of seizing the power. The seizing power in the vacuum that's left behind. Which probably would have been pretty good to bring up, but I think mostly Destiny's right here. Give me like 1 minute. My wife came home and I just wanna she's walking in the cold and stuff. I just wanna check on her real quick. And we'll get back to it.
Then I walked all the way back to still I know. I'm just like I did a lot of walking. I went for a lot. So I watched
PTO tomorrow.
Huh?
PTO tomorrow.
I had can't. Well, I have to go to work. I got surgery. Because like 2 people aren't gonna be there.
I was like your responsibility.
Because I'm trying to get more.
How is it your Okay. Well, I care more about you than I care about your place of business. And like I said, if you're worried about money, you have PTO.
But I do feel a lot better.
If other people aren't there, and they're not at fault for not being there, then it's not really your responsibility to make sure that you're there because they're not. They're just as much at fault as you are, right? You shouldn't be targeting yourself in favor of the business. I don't think that's good for you. Okay, I'm back.
to look
Let me
at the
just
Abraham Accord, I
go
feel like
back, like, 5
that's the
seconds.
most important thing that needs to happen in the Middle East. As much as people like to look at the Abraham Accords, who cares if what was it? Bahrain, I think Oman, I think
UAE,
Sudan,
Morocco.
the UAE and Morocco, yeah, are something like all of these people, even Saudi Arabia, already have like de facto normalization with Israel anyway. They're all trading.
No,
they're all-
this is, I mean, to pretend that anybody even 15 years ago would have been talking about normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel is insane. I mean, that's insane.
they were already on that. And they had already been they were already de facto
that's a
trading partners with each other.
They
had already been collaborating and
that's
doing
a
things.
wild claim that Israel and Saudi Arabia were going to normalize 15 years ago.
15
That-
years ago might have been a wild claim.
That's
But after Turkey, after Jordan, and then in the past like 20 years of like economic relations and ties
Sorry.
with each other, all of the leadership in the Middle East, and you'll agree with this, look at Israel and they go, okay, well we've got Palestinians who, God bless them, do nothing, and then you've got Israel, which is on on a region with no natural resources to somehow become like an economic giant. They're good to trade with. Their population is educated. They, have military power. All of the leadership in these Middle Eastern countries are wanting to be friendly with Israel and are engaging in trade de facto with Israel. And the idea that like the UAE and Bahrain were brought in to say like, oh well, now we're going to officially say this. I just
Those
I don't
were
think
those were the first steps toward obviously the formation of a new Middle East in which economics would predominate over sectarian conflict. The chief obstacle to that is Iran.
I
The
agree.
notion that
Yeah, that's
negotiations
pretty
with the
good.
Ayatollah were going to be a solution to any of this is
But do we think
absolutely benighted.
is it the Abraham Accords that's convincing Saudi Arabia to take a stance against Iran?
No, I mean
No,
Saudi
because
Arabia.
they're already fighting. They're already fighting with each other, right? Like,
No,
I don't think the Abraham Accords moved us any closer towards any type of real peace in the
No,
region.
the point
what
that
has to happen is something has to happen with Iran.
Look-
There has to be some diplomatic
Well-
bilateral communication there.
No, what has to happen is the containment of Iran, which was what was which was what was taking place with the increased normalization with the Sunni Arab world and Israel, combined with significant economic sanctions. The notion that there's this far-fetched notion in foreign policy circles that diplomacy
I think he needs to be a little bit more clear about his strategy for containment of Iran.
can sort of be wish cast out of thin air. That if you sit around a table, that you can always come to an agreement with somebody. The Ayatollahs do not have common interests with the United States. They do not. And this idea that they are willing to take money in exchange for example, some sort of peaceful acquiescence to Israel's existence is obviously untrue.
Hasn't
They're
that
literally funding.
hasn't that been the case though? That you've had a region with tons of sectarian violence for a long time, and then finally Turkey was like, you know what? This isn't worth it. The United States paid them a lot of money. They had conversations with Israel. And you know what? The economy, the economic gains.
Well, I mean,
and
the
lack-
relation.
and
I mean,
same thing with
not to
Jordan.
get-
Same thing with
not to
the
get into
whole
Turkish
Gulf.
politics, but
Sure,
the,
yeah.
but the but the situation with Turkey was actually quite warm between Israel and Turkey in the 90s when you had the sort of secular Muslim regime
in the 90s,
of,
but they
of
signed
Kemal
peace
Ataturk in place, and now Erdogan has joined in the fray, and Erdogan is significantly more radical
Sure.
than what
I'm
came before.
so sorry. If I said Turkey, I meant Egypt. My bad.
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
thinking
So
Egypt. Yeah.
right. So
So
yeah,
Like, in terms of like Egypt and Jordan, right, were the first two.
you need
big
practice.
ones.
Here's the thing.
Mhm.
You need. Is it possible that you could theoretically come to a deal with Iran only with a new leadership crew? Okay, this is true for every peace agreement in the region.
Mhm.
You could not. Israel could not have made peace with.
Well, they made peace
For-
with Egypt, and,
no, no,
and
no.
Sadat was the leader for Yom Kippur,
They
right?
did not make peace with Nasser. Right.
Sure.
The point is that this is a different regime. You need a different regime. This
But
is
I'm
one
saying
of
the same regime that did the part of the Yom Kippur War was the same regime that negotiated peace with Israel.
I mean, that's true.
Mhm.
It is also true that that is a relationship that could be cultivated specifically because it was Sadat who made clear he was going to come to the table.
Mhm.
Have the Iranians ever made clear that they would come to the table over, for example, the existence of the state of Israel?
No.
I mean, that is not a thing that's going to happen.
But I think people probably
Literally,
felt
their
the
proxy-
same.
Every single one of their proxy groups, every one of them, not only calls for the destruction of the state of Israel,
Mhm.
they also call for the destruction of America. I mean, this is literally the Houthi slogan. They're busy hitting ships, and their slogan is literally Allahu Akbar, death to America, death to the Jews, death to Israel. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, but and it's not all that catchy, but that is in fact their slogan. The notion that the regime that propagates that is going to be approached with diplomacy is not only wrong. The problem is that it's easy to say that the stakes of diplomacy are okay. Well, so we try to talk, right? Jaw is better than war. Sure. The only problem is that in the Middle East, weakness is taken as a sign that aggression might be an appropriate response. That is how things work in the Middle East. And the fact that that Joe Biden came into office with an orientation toward continuing the Obama policies in Iran has led to conflagrations, these sort of brush fires breaking out everywhere that Iran has borders with either the West or Israel or both, right? Any place that's happening is leading to brush fires because, again, the logic of violence in the Middle East is not quite the logic of violence in other places in the world. By the way, I think the logic of violence in the Middle East is actually closer to what most international politics looks like than we wish that it were. I mean, I think that's part of what's happening in Ukraine as well.
So you
Right,
think
which
that
brings
for-
me, by the way, here's my question about Ukraine.
Sure.
I don't mean
Well,
to
just real quick,
skip
and then
around.
you can
Yeah,
answer
go
this
for
one
it.
now. So you think that for Iran, right, a country that has been sanctioned for God knows how many years now, you think that for Iran, just continuing to sanction them and contain them is an effective way, is more effective than trying to engage them in bilateral or multilateral peace talks?
Yes,
So-
100%.
Okay.
And the proof is in the pudding.
Before we go to
Well, that does seem kind of come in conflict when he's saying like you can't use economic persuasion, but somehow sanctions work. Are sanctions not simply economic persuasion? Yeah, I wish Destiny would have addressed that because I don't understand that line of reasoning at all. That's
For
confusing to
Ukraine,
me.
can I ask about Israel? So you're both mostly in agreement, but what is
Oh, I don't know if I'd say that.
Okay, but as I'm learning, what is Israel doing right? What is Israel doing wrong in this very specific current war in Gaza?
I mean, frankly, I think that what Israel's doing wrong is if I were Israel, okay, like again, America's interests are not coincident with Israel's interests. If I were an Israeli leader, I would have swiveled up and out and knocked the bleep out of Hezbollah early.
What does
Because I
that
think
mean?
that
What does that mean?
so I would have Yoav
you.
Gallant, who's the defense minister of Israel, was encouraging Netanyahu, who's the prime minister, and the war cabinet, including Benny Gantz. So whenever people talk about the Netanyahu government, that's not what's in place right now. There's a unity war government in place that includes the political opposition. The reason I point that out is because there are a lot of people politically who will suggest that the actions Israel is currently taking are somehow the manifestation of a right wing government. Israel currently does not have a quote unquote right wing government. They have a unity government that includes the opposition. In any case, Yoav Gallant was urging in the very early days of the war that Israel should turn north, and instead of hitting Hamas,
So unfortunately, um, I don't know that much about Israel-Palestine conflict because even when I try to learn about it, everybody's so. I feel like everybody has their mind made up so strongly that I don't believe most people when they say things about it because it seems like they already have like everything's already sort of been decided for them. So it's super hard for me to take what anybody says about Israel Palestine at face value. I always think that it's going to be muddied under like their own interests and ideas that they have about it. And most people when they engage with it um, are like wholly unwilling to listen to anybody. So I don't really have any super strong opinions about it in general. It's just it's too complicated for me. Um, like I don't think I don't think it's like too complicated like objectively. It's just that the way that people engage with it is so complicated that I can't ever feel confident that I'm getting to the truth of any of the matters in it.
they should
When
actually
whether it be like my own research or whether it be like the discourse that I see about it, everything just feels so like personally politically charged that it's just I feel like I don't have any way of having it not just really just be remaining a mystery to me.
take the opportunity to knock Hezbollah out because Hezbollah is significantly more dangerous to the existence of the state of Israel than Hamas. I actually agree with that. As far as what Israel has been doing wrong in the actual war, I mean, I think that, again, from an American perspective, I think that Israel is doing pretty well. From an Israeli perspective, if I were Israeli, I would actually want Israel to be less loose about sending its soldiers in on the ground level. So Israel's attempting to minimize civilian casualties, and the cost of that has been the highest military death toll that Israel has had since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. I mean, I personally know through 1 degree of separation, 3 separate people have been killed in Gaza, and that's because they're going in door to door. It's because they're attempting to minimize civilian casualties, and they're losing a lot of guys in this particular war. The problem that Israel has had, historically speaking, is that Israel got very complacent about its own security situation. They believed the technology was going to somehow correct for the hatred on the other side of the wall. So our people have to live underground for 2 weeks at a time while some rockets fall, but at least it's not a war. And that complacence, bred what happened on October 7th. So to me, what Israel did wrong was years and years and years of complacence and belief in an Oslo system that is at root a failure because you cannot make a peace agreement with people who do not want to make peace with you. So that's what I think Israel is doing wrong. I have a feeling there's going to be wide divergence on this point.
Maybe. In terms of broadly speaking, I generally oppose settlement expansion. Is a thing that Israel does incorrectly that I think is kind of like provocative to at least all the Palestinians in the West Bank, and it probably energizes hatred in the Gaza Strip for them as well. In terms of conducting warfare, the one thing that I always say to everybody, especially Americans, is you can't evaluate things from an American perspective. It's very stupid. It happened a lot with Ukraine, where people are like, oh, well, didn't they work with the Nazis? And like, weren't the Soviets the good guys? And it's like, well, in other parts of the world, it's not quite as simple. And I think the same is true for Israel-Palestine, that a lot of Americans will analyze Palestine, which it's not. It's a conflict
Sorry, I
between
hit my
Israel
stream deck.
and then
My bad.
Palestine, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. Right now it is. I think that however, one area where I'll break with Ben is I think that minimizing civilian casualties and everything is very, very, very important, I think, on the Israeli side. I don't think it's important so that the U.S. will stay with them, because I think the U.S. is probably going to stick with Israel as long as they don't do anything crazy. And I don't even think it matters for the international community. It definitely doesn't matter for the UN, because Jesus Christ. However, I think it's really, really, really important that I think that in the Middle East, broadly speaking, I think that leadership, especially in the Gulf, has gotten over the Palestinian issue. I think that leadership is kind of like they don't care as much anymore, but the populations still care quite a bit. And I think that the main issue that Israel could run into is if the civilian death toll does climb too high, and if they start to hit this, 40, 50, 60,000 number of civilian casualties, they run the risk of the civilian populations in the surrounding Middle Eastern states becoming so antagonistic towards Israel that they start to take steps back towards normalization in the region. So, for instance, I know that Bahrain, I think, already pulled out their ambassador to Israel. My guess is going to be it's temporary. I know that on the public speaking side, you've got a lot of people condemning Israel for the attacks. And on the private side, you've got people telling Israel, please kill all of Hamas because this is untenable and nobody wants to work in this situation. I don't know if this ended up being true or not. I'm guessing it didn't, but I saw on a couple of Twitter accounts it was leaked that potentially Saudi Arabia was considering installing a government in the West Bank that they would run.
No, I mean, I think Israel would love nothing better than that, but that is
For
not
sure,
something the
yeah,
Saudis.
okay.
One of the big problems in the Middle East is literally no one wants to preside over the Palestinians.
Yes.
No one.
So
in the
I think
Arab
that-
states, Israel, no one.
Yeah.
No one
So I
wants-
think the issue is, and I think, and I'm largely actually, I'm very sympathetic towards the Palestinians because I think that for since 48 and onwards, I think that all of the Arab states super gassed them up on that. They wanted the Palestinians to fight because they wanted to fight with Israel. However, as time has gone on and they've realized that it's kind of a lost cause, states have started to drop out. So you're getting these bilateral peace treaties with Egypt and with Jordan. You're getting multilateral agreements like the Abraham Accords. And now the Palestinians are looking around and like, okay, well, you guys told us to fight all this time. And now the only people that we have supporting us are Iranian proxies. So the Palestinians are in a very weird spot where they've like lost all their support. I think that Israel, what I would say to be quote unquote critical of Israel is Israel needs to take strong steps towards peace that probably involves them enduring some undue hardship. So not the October 7th attacks, because Jesus, that's way too much, but other types of attacks that they might have to deal with that might cause some civilians to die that they don't come out over the top with and retaliate with if there's ever going to be peace in that region. However, another thing that I've always said is a huge problem between Israel and Palestine is I think that both sides think that if they continue to fight, it will be good for them. But the problem is one side is delusional. I think Israel wants to continue to fight because they get justifications for the annexation of the Golan Heights. They get justifications for expansions, especially into Area C, that I think they're probably going to try to annex soon. They get justifications for the increased military posturing towards the Gaza Strip and the embargoes. And Israel is right that if the conflict continues, really the situation only improves for Israel over time. But the Palestinians also all believe that if they keep fighting, they've thought this since 2000 under Arafat, that if they just keep fighting, they'll get better gains too, but that's not the case.
Is there a difference between Palestinian citizens and the leadership when you say that?
I love all people. I love all people around the world. And I think that when we analyze issues, I think that we have to be very honest with what the people on the ground think. And the idea that Hamas is just this one-off thing in the Gaza Strip is not only incorrect with the situation on the ground, it's also incredibly ahistorical. And the idea that like the Palestinians in the West Bank, of which I believe the most recent polling shows, I want to say 75 to 80% support the October 7th attacks. Palestinians in general
surprising.
want to fight in violent conflict with Israel. That's not just the position of the government. That's not just people. There's a reason why Abbas doesn't want to do elections in the West Bank, and it's because the Palestinian people really do want to fight with Israel. But to combat that problem is like, you have to get the UN on board. We've got to do an actual addressing of the Palestinian refugee problem, which is handled like a joke right now. Iran has to be brought to the table in terms of negotiations. There has to be
really
huge
good.
efforts made to economically revitalize these like Palestinian areas.
That's
even though they're
really
one of the
good.
highest recipients of aid in the world. You have to do something about the embargo and the blockade in the Gaza Strip, which isn't just maintained by Israel.
Did the stuff you took work yet? That's really good, right? My wife's making chili. Very good.
It's also maintained by Egypt. You should.
That was a lot of like homemade.
There's no meat in it, but it has the feeling like there is.
I put steak seasoning in it.
Ah,
I
Ask
wanted
why.
to give it a little
Yeah, there's a
bit of,
lot of
like,
things that
as
have to
opposed to
happen to fix
regular
that
chili
problem.
as I
But
could.
the reality is I don't think Israel really wants to because they get to continue their expansion into the West Bank, and I don't think anybody around the world really cares that much. Because in a
So
month we won't be talking about
I will argue with that. The idea that Israel does not want to end the conflict is belied by the history of what just happened with the Gaza Strip. So when we talk about settlements, for example, Israel did have settlements inside the Gaza Strip. There were 8,000 Jews who were living in.
I'm gonna turn off my camera for a minute. We'll keep playing, listen to it. I said for the Israel Palestine stuff, I don't think that I can really add a whole lot to it. I just don't have like very strong opinions about it. But here, UK and Russia, I have a lot more feelings about. Okay, I think yeah, everything else I have feelings about. This is
Inside
just
the Gaza Strip in Gush Katif.
I just really
Up
don't know
until
what to say about
2005, they withdrew all of those
because I think
people.
I'd be more
took
wrong
them
than either
literally
of
out of
them.
their homes. And the result was not the burgeoning of a better attitude toward the state of Israel with regard to, for example, the Palestinian population in Gaza. In fact, it was more radical in Gaza than it was in the West Bank. The result was obviously the election of Hamas, the October 7th attacks, in which unfortunately many civilians took part in the October 7th attacks. There's video of people rushing who are civilians and dressed in civilian clothing into Israeli
Careful, those
villages.
aren't always the same thing.
Well, no,
with
that is
Hamas.
100% true, obviously. And when it comes to Area C and Israel's supposed deep and abiding desire for territorial expansion in Area C. So for those who are not familiar with the Oslo Accords, and again, this is getting very abstruse, but the Oslo Accords are broken down into 3 areas of the West Bank. Area A is under full Palestinian control. That'd be like Jenin and Nablus, the major cities, for example. There's Area B, which is mixed Israeli-Palestinian control, where Israel provides some level of military security and control. And then there's Area C. And Area C was like to be decided later. It was left up for possible concessions to the Palestinian Authority if the Oslo Accords had moved forward. Those are disputed territories. There is building taking place in Area C by both, actually, no one talks about this, but by Palestinians as well as Israelis. And the question as to whether if Israel stopped building, there have been many settlement freezes in the past, including some undertaken by Netanyahu. And it actually has not done one iota of good in moving the ball forward in terms of actual negotiations. Again, the biggest problem is that the leadership for Palestinians has spent every day since really 67. It's not even 48, because between 48 and 67, Jordan was in charge of the West Bank and Egypt was in charge of the Gaza Strip. And at no point did either of those powers say, hey, maybe we ought to hand this over to an independent Palestinian state, which was originally the division that was promoted by the UN partition plan in 47. Because of that, the leadership post 67 and really starting in 64, the Palestine Liberation Organization was founded in 64, and it called for the liberation of the land. In 64, they had the West Bank and they had the Gaza Strip. So they're talking about Tel Aviv. When it was founded in 64, the basic idea, as kind of indicated by that, was Israel will not exist. And that was a promise that's been made by pretty much every Palestinian leader in Arabic to the people that they are talking to. Yasser Arafat famously would do this sort of thing. He'd speak in English and talk about how he wanted a 2-state solution, and then he'd go back to his own people and say, this is a Trojan horse, and we're going to... If Israel could, if you think that Israeli parents want to send their kids at the age of 18 to go and monitor Jenin and Nablus and be in Khan Yunis, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. Israelis do not want that. In fact, Israelis didn't want that so much that they allowed rockets to fall in their cities for full-on 18 years in order to avoid sending soldiers en masse back into the Gaza Strip.
True, but I think Israel does want to continue to expand settlements into the West Bank, right? They want to continue to build. They want to have all of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem as well.
Well, I mean, East Jerusalem has already been annexed. So East Jerusalem is, according to Israel, a part of Israel. That's not a settlement.
Sure.
Okay, so there's that. With regard to, does Israel have an interest in expanding settlements in the West Bank? Why would they not until there's a peace partner?
Sure, that's what I mean. But I'm saying as long as the conflict continues, because even when you talk about
but your suggestion is that they're incentivizing the conflict to continue so they can grab more land.
Well, no, let me be very clear. I don't think there's like a plan. Like, so some people say, for instance, they'll take that one quote from Netanyahu and they'll try to say that like he was funding the people in the Gaza Strip by allowing Qatari money to come in, even though he was actually speaking in opposition to Abbas, allowing the Gaza Strip to fall for Netanyahu to clear it out for him and they give it back, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not claiming those theories. I'm just saying that I think that Israel would take a relatively neutral stance towards conflict enduring, because as long as the conflict endures and as long as the settlements can expand, I think that ultimately benefits Israel.
I think there would be let's put it this way. If suddenly there arose among the Palestinians a deep and abiding desire for peace, approved by a vast majority of the population with serious security guarantees, I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find Israelis who would not be willing to at least consider that in
feel
return
like
for
we're
not
like-
expanding bathrooms in Efrat.
I kind of I would have agreed with you on October 6th. I think we're probably a year or two
Oh,
away
no,
from that right now.
No,
though.
no, but,
Yeah.
but no. The point I'm making is that Israelis now realize that the entire peace process was a sham. Meaning the people who are on the other side of the table were using it as a Trojan horse in the first place. The death of Oslo is not the death of Israeli hopefulness. It's the death of the illusion that on the other side of the table was anyone worth bargaining with. That's what's happening. And that's why you have this sort of insane disconnect right now between the United States and the Israeli government. Again, it's a unity government. No one in Israel is talking about making concessions to the Palestinian Authority for a wide variety of reasons, including the fact that Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah continues to pay actual families of terrorists who kill Jews.
Sure, the Martyr
and,
Fund, yeah.
Right. And the
which is
fact,
from the moderate West Bank.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's so again, like the taste in Israel for this is even the people who are the Chilonim, right? Those are the most secular people in Israel, which was, by the way, the place that was attacked on October 7th. I mean, what people should understand is that October 7th was not an attack against settlements in the West Bank. It was an attack on peace villages that were essentially disarmed. And many of these people who were killed were peace activists who were literally trying to work with people in Gaza to get them jobs. I mean, it's just, it's mind-boggling. That's why you've had this ground shift in Israel. The next 20 years in Israel is going to be about security and economic development, period, end of story. Everything else goes second, third place.
And I will say, I agree essentially with everything you're saying. Not to loop back on another topic, but this is one of the reasons then why I was so critical. I don't want to say critical, but like kind of nonchalant about the Abraham Accords, because they didn't address anything with the Palestinians whatsoever. They brought in countries that weren't super relevant to the conflict. They didn't bring in Qatar, which is where a lot of the money and support for the Gaza Strip comes from. They didn't involve Iran at all. They involved bilateral.
No, but it totally changed the mentality. And this is why what I'm seeing right now, this is why, listen, I think that Biden has done better than I certainly expected him to do in terms of support for Israel. Like Obama was way less supportive of Israel than Biden by every metric. With that said, the rhetoric that he's been using recently and that Blinken have been using recently about Israel needs to make painful concessions for peace, Israel recentering this issue at the center of relations in the Middle East is doomed to failure. The magic is a strong word. The benefit of the Abraham Accords was proof of what you're saying, which is true, which is that all of these surrounding countries in reality have abandoned the idea that there's a centrality to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That is not the central conflict in the Middle East. And by the way, one of the reasons it's not the central conflict in the Middle East is because actually, ironically, because of the rise of Iran, right? It's Sunni states that are largely signing up with Israel because they're realizing they need some sort of counterweight to a burgeoning nuclear power in Iran.
Can we talk about Ukraine?
Sure.
You have a disagreement with you with what Destiny said.
My main problem with Biden's policy with regard to Ukraine is that he outsourced the end goal of the war to Zelensky early on. Now, that might make sense if that goal were something that he was willing to fund to the point of achievement, or if Zelensky could have achieved it on his own. But right now, and this has been true since pretty early on in the war, this point Henry Kissinger made, that pretty early on in the war, it was very clear that, for example, Crimea was going nowhere. The Russians had control of Crimea, barring the United States giving permission to fly F-16s over Crimea. Nothing was going to change over there. The same thing was true in most of the Donbass, right, in Luhansk and Donetsk. That was not going to change. Zelensky's stated goal, and you understand it, he's the leader of Ukraine, right, is that there was a predation on his territory in 2014, and that the Russians sent their little green men across the border, and then they took all of these areas. And so he, as the leader of Ukraine, is saying, okay, I want all of that back. Now, the reality is that the U.S.'s interests had largely been achieved in the first few months of the war, meaning the revocation of the ability of Russia to take Ukraine and just ingest it. And two, the devastation of Russia's military capability. I mean, Russia has just been wrecked. I mean, their military is in serious straits because of the war in Ukraine. From an American perspective, I'm very much pro all of that. I think that we have an interest in Ukraine maintaining a buffer status against territorially aggressive Russia. I think that the United States does have an interest in degrading the Russian military to the extent that it can't threaten the Baltic states or threaten Kazakhstan or other countries in the region. The problem I have with Biden's strategy is, as always, I think that it's a muddle, and I think muddles tend to end with misperceptions. War tends to break out and maintain because of misperception. Misperception of the other side's strength, the other side's intentions, and all of the rest. People misperceive what's going to happen. They say, I'll cross that line and nothing will happen, right? This is what Putin thought. He thought, I'll cross that line, they'll greet me as a liberator, and because the United States just surrendered in Afghanistan, essentially, they won't do anything, and the West is fragmenting because NATO's fragmenting and all the rest of this, and obviously he was wrong on all of those scores. The problem for Biden is that, as with virtually every war, no end line was set. And so it became out recently, it was widely reported, that actually there was a peace deal that was on the table in the first few months that Putin was on board with, that basically would have ceded Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea to Russia in return for solidification of those lines, American and Western security guarantees to Ukraine, right? Ukraine wouldn't formally join NATO, but there would be security guarantees to Ukraine. We're ending up there anyway. It's just taking a lot more money and a lot more time to get there.
And do you think
And
Trump would have helped push that peace?
yes, and I think that Biden actually did Zelensky a bit of a disservice because Zelensky knows where this war is going to end, and it's not going to end with Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea in Ukrainian hands. It's just not going to, and he knows that. What actually, in my opinion, Zelensky needed was for Joe Biden to be the person who foisted that deal upon him so that he could then go back to his own people and say, listen, guys, I wanted all those things, but the Americans weren't willing to allow me to have all those things. And so we did an amazing job. We did a heroic job in defending our own land. We devastated the Russian military, even though no one expected us to. But we can't get back those things because it's unrealistic to get back those things because America basically, they're a big funder and they're the ones who want the deal. Instead, what Biden said, and this was reported in the Washington Post last year, the Biden administration said, we're going to fight for as long as it takes with as much as it takes. And when they were asked until when, they said, whatever Zelensky says. And that's not a policy. That's just a recipe for a frozen conflict with endless funding. Now, it may be that Putin has walked away from the table and that deal is no longer available. If that deal is available right now, I certainly hope that's being pursued behind closed doors. My main critique, again, of Biden is that when you outsource the end goal to another country without stating what America's interest is, that's a problem. I also think that Biden did really quite a poor job of sort of explaining what America's realistic interests are. I don't like it when American leaders, it's weird for me to say this, but I'm not a huge fan of the we're in it to protect democracy kind of rhetoric. Because frankly, we are allied with many, many countries that are not democracies, and that's not actually how foreign policy works. We should, as an overall, 30,000-foot goal, advance democracy and rights where we can. But the reason that we were fighting in favor of Ukraine, and when I say fighting, I mean giving them money and giving them weaponry. The reason that we were doing that in favor of Ukraine is not because of Ukraine's long history of clean voting and non-corruption. The reason that we were doing that is to counter Russian interests in the region. I mean, it was a pure realpolitik play. And that realpolitik play is hard to deny no matter what side of the aisle you're on. I think that what many Americans are reverting to is we have no interest there. Why are we spending money there and not spending money here? And that kind of stuff. And that argument can always be applied unless you actually articulate the reason why it is good for Americans beyond simply the ideological for the United States to be involved in a thing. So for example, I think right now, when Biden is talking, I think that what Biden just did, the United States, as we speak, is striking the Houthis. I think that that's a really, really good thing. I think that's a necessary thing. I think American people should understand why that is happening. It's not because of quote unquote ideology. Mm-hmm. It is, I mean, on a very root level, but really it's because you're screwing up the straits. I mean, you can't do that. You can't screw up free trade. And Americans have an interest in not seeing all of our prices at the grocery store double and triple because a bunch of ragtag pirates, akin to the Barbary pirates from 1800 are bothering everyone, right?
So Ben said a lot there. Do you disagree with any aspect on the Ukraine side?
A little bit, yeah. I think on the macro, I agree. Maybe we get into the weasel a little bit on some things. On the final thing that he said, though, I wish that Americans could have honest conversations about foreign policy. I think that it would just be better for everybody. I don't know if it's, Red Scare after the Cold War, where it was like literally, the behemoths, were fighting against communism. And we felt like after 91, every single foreign policy decision needs to be able to be explained in like 7 words, like he's the bad guy and that's it. I wish we had more honest conversations about what our foreign policy interest is in a particular region, because I don't think most Americans honestly could even articulate why Israel would be an important ally, or why it's important to defend Ukraine against Russia, or why should we care about Taiwan at all. I don't know if most Americans could articulate anything there, even though they might have very strong opinions about
I don't understand what is he saying in response to Ben here?
Why we ought to be involved in certain conflicts. So I do agree with that. I wish we had more honest conversations about foreign policy. In terms of how Biden has handled Ukraine, the things that I liked the most were, one, that he was very clear in the beginning about what we wouldn't do. So Biden saying that we're not going to do not a red line, no-fly zones over Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be deploying troops on the ground in Ukraine. We're not going to be doing anything that would have, U.S. soldiers and Russian soldiers crossing swords with each other. That's not going to happen. I like that he made that very clear at the beginning. And I like that he coalition built between NATO and the EU to get people to send funds, training, soldiers, airplanes, and everything to Ukraine. I thought those two things were really good. In terms of basically writing Zelensky a blank check, I would like to hope that Biden and the entire United States learned a lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan that open ended missions with unlimited budgets and no clear goal are like the worst foreign policy decisions you can ever do. They've like defined US foreign policy for the past 2 or 3 decades, which is unfortunate, but seems to be the case. My feeling would be, and this is just a feeling, I don't know if internal cables have leaked that say otherwise, is the Biden administration has probably always had a quiet position of at some point there's going to be an off ramp here. And I think even a month or two ago, I think those talks were being leaked, that discussion had begun with Zelensky looking for an off ramp. But publicly, of course, the United States is never going to come out and say, we're going to support you guys to fight as much as you want for 3 months. And then after that, it's no more. Obviously, that can't be the statement. It's always going to be that we're going to support you in your fight against Russia.
Yeah, we tried that under Obama with Afghanistan. It was terrible.
Well, Destiny's a really good point here. If the United States publicly sets a time limit for how long they're going to support them, then Russia can kind of scale everything back and then wait until the United States is supposed to pull back, and then they can go all out. That's like anything along those lines is like a fantasy reality.
Terrible.
Sure. Yeah, you can't.
We'll
You can't
escalate the troop levels to X, but only for 6 months, and then we're
Yeah,
pulling
you
out.
can't. You just can't do that. It's always going to come off as we're going to support you forever, and as long as it takes, and as long as you need, whatever we have to do to defend freedom and democracy in your country. And any other statement would be absurd. So I can understand why it feels like on a public level, a blank check and an indefinite time period was granted to Zelensky, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think I hope we've learned our lessons in the Middle East about the forever.
I'm gonna continue to comment, but I'm gonna turn off my camera while I eat, so you guys don't have to watch me eat. Like, it's weird.
Wars, that this isn't going to be a forever funding to Ukraine to fight for as long as they want. I do disagree. I feel like we're playing a little bit retrospectively, saying that, like, well, it's obvious that they're not going to capture the Donbass. It's obvious that they're not going to capture Crimea. I agree for Crimea, that was incredibly obvious. But it was also really obvious that in 2 weeks, Russia would own Kiev and Ukraine was going to be Belarus 2.0. I think that even for a lot of military people, and analysts around the world, that was an expectation, or at least a significant probability. Nobody knew, the phrase that's thrown around now is paper tiger, that Russia's military was as ill-equipped as they were. So I can understand why, especially
That's
if you're
true.
Ukraine and if you've repelled an invasion from one of the world's largest armies, why you might feel like, well, fuck it, let's fight for a few months, let's fight for a year, let's see what happens. And I can understand the United States supporting them, but I agree that there has to be some reasonable off-ramp where we're not going to fight forever. I think the U.S. State Department has already begun those conversations with Zelensky to look at what that off-ramp looks like. But yeah, I'm not too sure, other than like explicitly stating publicly, like, you can only fight until this.
I think realistically, probably we either do I think like the fear of like Russia retaliating because if like Ukraine becomes part of NATO is like, I don't think that they can actually like, they might be able to fire some nukes, but I don't think they'll get very far with it. So if we're not going to do that, we should at least be fronting like we're supporting them, even when we stop. Probably nothing better that we could do. We can't give them support forever and ever, but we can at least appear to be. And that would probably be enough to keep Russia in check for like a pretty long time, I'd say. It seems like that'd be effective for like quite a while.
To date, I don't really know what else I would change. I don't think the Biden administration should have done that. I don't know what else.
Do you think Biden should cut this deal on the funding? Meaning, there's this $105 billion deal that's been held up by debate between Republicans and Democrats over border, right? So basically, it contains $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for
Never mind, because then what actually goes to the money that we're publicly saying we're doing with it? It sort of gives the government a free check to do whatever they want. Okay, I take it back.
Israel, another
It's too
several
bad
billion
for us.
dollars for Taiwanese defense against China, and then include some border funding and some border provisions. Republicans want the border funding and the border provisions because we can get into the illegal immigration issue, but that's a pretty serious issue. And Biden and Democrats have been unwilling to hold that up. And that seems to me like, just from put aside Republicans, Democrats, it seems like political malpractice, meaning there's a widespread perception in the United States that the border is a disaster area. Joe Biden wants these things. Many Republicans don't want these things. if he caves on the border stuff, he gets all the things that he wants, and he's going to be able to go back to the moderates in the country and say, I did something about the border. It seems like such an obvious win.
If he caves on the border stuff, you mean on the Ukraine stuff?
Yes, because then he gets
Yeah.
the whole package.
Sure,
Meaning
yeah.
he can go back to his own base and he can say, listen, guys, I wanted to be easy on the border. The Republicans forced me to it, but we needed the Ukraine aid. We needed the Taiwan aid, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like that's
You're going to be more educated than me on this. I don't like, or maybe I just don't know enough. I don't like the principle that when we
The same thing.
negotiate things in the United States, there's like 50 million hostages at all points in time for every single thing. Like, oh boy, here comes the debt ceiling. What do the Republicans want? What do the Democrats want? Oh boy, like here, we can't fund our government. But I mean, obviously, the argument is going to be that if the Ukraine funding doesn't come in this bill, and if Biden and his administration feel like it's really important, that or not unilaterally, but as a single issue, it's not going to pass. So I would say that at this point, and I don't know what the conversations look like between the Biden administration and Zelensky, I would say at this point that it's probably fair to start making contingencies on the money that we give to Ukraine. That listen, like this conflict has waged on now. Like now we need to start looking for potential peace. We can't just write you an unlimited check. So I mean, if those strings are attached, I'd be okay with it. But the broader question of like, is it okay to make this particular piece of legislation with all this funding contingent on the Ukrainian funding? I mean, that just seems to be the way the government works now, unfortunately.
Quick pause. Bathroom break. One of the big issues in this presidential election is going to be January 6th. It's in the news now, and I
Oops, sorry. Destiny has to come out ahead of this. If he doesn't, it's like basically inexcusable. This should be his strongest subject at this point. He dove so hard into it that if Shapiro can get him on this, then I feel like he just has like no shot. Yeah, coming out ahead in any of it. He's honestly, I feel like he's given like a pretty weak showing throughout this entire thing, which is pretty shocking. He's more focused on his like broad appeal optics than actually winning this debate.
think it's going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. So, question for Destiny first. Did Donald Trump incite an insurrection on January 6th, 2021?
Absolutely. This is probably ignoring every other issue we've talked about, of which I think there are plenty that I would say disqualify Trump from holding office. I think that the conduct and the behavior leading up to and including January 6th, I think is wildly indefensible. I am excited to see Ben try
There we
to,
go. There we go.
The 3 to 4 stages are the taking what I think any reasonable person would say knowingly false information about elections being rigged or ballot boxes being stuffed or Ruby Freeman, running ballots through.
It's nice that he actually seems kind of confident here and a little bit cocky, because maybe that means he'll actually give us like a real Destiny style debate on the subject, because he fucking hasn't yet.
3 times in Georgia, taking that knowingly false information and trying to call state secretaries and stuff to have them flip their electoral vote. That was horrible.
You can even see like he's smiling and stuff. He's like this. This is about as much in the zone I think he could be in. So like, good God, man, he's got to score some points for me. I feel like just Ben has just either made him just sort of like nod and agree, make super super weak arguments that don't really matter. There's like disagreements that don't really move the conversation at all, or just like lose the points. So fingers crossed, I guess.
The plot that Eastman hatched in order to have these like false slates of electors where all 7 states had citizens go in and falsely say that they were the duly elected electors that could submit votes to Congress. That was insane. That happened. Asking or begging Pence to accept these false states of electors initially and then just say you should just throw it out completely and throw it to the House delegation, which was majority Republican. That was absolutely unbelievable. And then on the day of January 6th, trying to capitalize on the violence by him, Giuliani, and Eastman making phone calls to senators and congressmen saying, well, don't you think maybe you guys should delay the vote a little bit? Don't you think they're just really mad about the election? I think he said to McCarthy, they're more upset than you. And his utter dereliction of duty in not doing anything to stop the rioting that happened on January 6th because he was too busy taking advantage of it. I think all of these things are horrible. I look forward to seeing the Jack Smith indictments play out in court, maybe even the Georgia RICO case. But yeah, I think all of these things are unfathomable. And I think when you look at the plot from start to finish, clearly the goal the entire time was to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power. That was the goal from start to finish, whether it was through false claims, whether it was through illegal schemes, or whether it was through violence at the Capitol to delay the certification of the vote.
Ben?
So I'm glad you're excited. It's always fun.
Uh-huh.
So there are two elements to incitement of insurrection. One is incitement. The other is insurrection. So incitement has a legal standard. So does insurrection. Neither of those standards are met. So if you're asking me, morally speaking, did Donald Trump do the right thing between November 4th and January 6th? I said, I will continue to say, no, he did not. I think he was saying things that are false, with just factually false about his theories with regard to the election, about the election being stolen, about fraud. This was all adjudicated in court. He did not even bring many of the claims that he's brought publicly and all the rest of that. If we're talking about incitement of insurrection as a legal standard, it doesn't meet any of those standards. When it comes to incitement, it has to be incitement to immediate lawless action. That's the standard for incitement. And I'm very meticulous in how I use this because I happen to speak publicly a lot, and that means there are lots of people who listen to me, which means some of those people are probably crazy. And some of them may go and do a crazy thing. Did I incite them? The media tends to use the word incitement very loosely with regard to this sort of stuff, in the same way that Bernie Sanders, quote unquote, incited the congressional baseball shooting. He did not. Bernie Sanders has a lot of things I disagree with. I think Bernie's a schmuck. Doesn't matter. He did not incite that. So saying bad things is not the same thing as inciting violence. Inciting violence, the legal standard in the United States is, I want you to go punch that guy in the face. That's inciting. With regard to insurrection, typically in insurrection, and there are some descriptions in case law, though none in statutory law, as far as I'm aware, the typical description in case law is the replacement of one legitimate government of the United States with another by violent means. The notion that Donald Trump coordinated any such insurrection is belied by the FBI itself. The FBI put out a report in, I believe it was August of 2021, suggesting that there was no well-coordinated insurrectionist attempt coordinated by the White House. In fact, what you had was Donald Trump thrashing around like that weird alien in the movie Life. I don't know if you ever saw it with Jake Gyllenhaal, where he's like kind of thrashing up against this glass box, just an alien just thrashing up against the glass box. That I think is more what you were seeing from November 4th to January 6th. And then, again, the claim that January 6th itself was an insurrection. So virtually, I'm not aware that anyone was charged with actual insurrection. There were some people who were charged with seditious conspiracy. There are insurrection statutes that do exist. No one was charged under those particular statutes. There were some people who you could say informally had insurrectionist ideas. Those would be the people who wanted to hang Nancy Pelosi or kill Mike Pence. And those people are in jail right now. And the election went forward. The election was certified. Mike Pence presided over the certification. Mitch McConnell presided over the certification. Joe Biden has been the president for the last 3 years. So Donald Trump, by the way, was still president at that point. If he had actively wanted to do what other people who have actually launched coups have done, he would have theoretically called the National Guard not to put down the riot, but to actually depose the sitting government of the United States in the name of a specious legal theory. He did not do that. He did not attempt that. Nobody working for him did that. The most you can say, I think, about what everybody was doing is that, and I want to say everybody. We can talk about Trump because this is really about Trump. He used a phrase that Trump was disseminating knowingly false information. The word that's carrying a lot of weight there is the word knowingly.
With full awareness of what one was doing.
So
Okay.
knowingly implies a knower. Do I think the information he was disseminating was false? Yes. Do I think that Donald Trump has a unique capacity to convince himself of nearly anything that is to his own benefit? Absolutely. And I think that that's actually what Donald Trump was doing there. And the evidence of that is Donald Trump being a human and all of us watching him for the last several years.
You know what? It really fucking sucks that is a legitimately good point. I actually think that is a good point. It is quite believable that Trump is able to delude himself into thinking anything.
So, the idea that he knew it to be false, I'm not even sure those standards apply in any, and just assessing him as a human, which is really what we're being asked to do because there's an intent element to this crime. Do you think that today Donald Trump knows that he lost the election?
Absolutely.
So
I think so too.
I
yeah.
don't actually. I think
But
that,
when so I'm glad that you have the attorney.
It sucks because I think that it's believable when somebody says they don't think that, because Trump has been such a clown. He does fight tooth and nail for things that are obviously not true. Um, I think Ben is being fairly weaselly here, but like it's believable enough to get away with. So it's Christ, I think it's tough.
Attorney background. When we are assessing mens rea, when we're looking at certain criminal statutes where intent is required, it's a reasonable person standard, right? Like, would a reasonable
well-
person have known that they were?
no, it depends on the mens rea standard. So it's not the same in every case. If you have to establish individual intent,
Mhm.
then it's not enough to say a reasonable person should have known. That would be enough for a negligence statute.
Sure,
Usually, when
but
you're
for-
talking about reasonable person statutes, just legally speaking,
Mhm.
a reasonable person statute is should a reasonable person have known. That's when you get to like manslaughter. You
Sure.
can't do a reasonable person standard on like first degree murder.
So
You have
for
to establish actual motive in first degree murder.
but for first degree murder, you don't need the statement of "I plan to kill this person" or "I intend to kill this person." We
No.
can prove that state of mind.
You- no,
using
you
a
need
ton
a-
of
you
other
need a- you need a-
circumstantial evidence.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. You could prove it.
So I feel like my feeling for Donald Trump was there were all these people around him that he trusted to investigate election fraud. He trusted Barr and the
I've heard Destiny's argument on this several times. I think it's pretty ironclad.
DOJ. He asked Pence, his vice president, to look into it. He asked his chief of staff. He asked his legal counsel. He has so many people that ostensibly he trusts them if he's asking them to look into it. And when all of them looked into it and reported back to him, no, we found nothing. Unless we're going to literally make the concession that Trump might actually be a delusional psycho man, at that point, should he not have realized, like, well, okay, maybe
That's
there's
not a
nothing.
thing he should have realized the day of the election that he lost the election. But that's not, that's
Sure, but I'm
not
just
the
asking.
question.
I'm saying that, like, at that point, should he not have known that for him to go and propagate those claims that he'd asked all of the people he trusted to research, and then for him to take those claims to Michigan and to Georgia, and then publicly and to try to convince people to throw out the election, you don't think that?
But you're doing the same thing. You're reverting to should a reasonable person have known? Yes, a reasonable person should have known. Did Donald Trump know? That's a different question. And so conflating those two questions is going to get you into some messy territory. By the way, this is why Jack Smith charged the way Jack Smith charged.
Yeah, which
Right?
wasn't.
Jack Smith did not charge conspiracy. Jack Smith did not charge insurrection. He did not charge seditious conspiracy. Right? If he, the
But I
reason is
think for
because
Jack Smith, though, I
Jack
think-
Smith is a good lawyer. What he's doing is he's actually broadly, I would say, pretty obviously expanding statutory coverage in weird areas in order to cover a thing that doesn't quite fit into any of these legal categories. But the point that I'm making is that Jack Smith is on my side of this. He doesn't think that he can actually establish the intent necessary to convict under a seditious conspiracy or an insurrection.
I agree
charge,
with that,
right?
but I think a lot of the underlying facts, though, because he does bring up those calls to Raffensperger in Georgia, he does bring up in the indictments that they were knowingly false information. So it seems like that's going to be part of the case, maybe not to convict on any of the 4 particular charges that he mentioned, but it seems like that's probably going to be part of what he's going to have to establish in court to.
Part of the reason why he charged the way that he did is not because he doesn't think that it's true, but because legally you can navigate away from these kinds of charges pretty easily, or like easy enough. That doesn't mean that they're less true, though. It just means legally it'd be very hard to convict, which isn't the same as what this debate is. I don't think that Destiny should be so lenient here. It feels I guess I don't really like to use this kind of wording, but it feels like he's showing a lot of weakness in his argument here.
Convict Trump.
So
Yeah.
I want to look at the actual text of the charges.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry that I don't have them memorized. I believe one's a fraud charge that generally does not apply to cases like this. Generally, the fraud charge is like you're trying to steal money from the government.
Sure,
one
fraud
is
has
a-
been
one is
used
like a-
pretty broadly in the past, though. It doesn't have to just be because Smith has done oral arguments in response to a lot of the claims by Trump's lawyers. This was one of them. The infinite civil and criminal immunity was another one of them, where he cites past cases where these types of things, because I think it was to defraud of civil rights, I think was the 4th charge.
Right. So the defraud of civil rights is usually somebody standing in the actual like voting house door and preventing you from voting,
Mhm.
not you have a specious legal theory that you espouse in court about whether those votes should be thrown out.
Sure.
You know,
Although
that-
I don't like when we say specious legal theory and novel application, which I do agree some of these in some ways is novel. I don't think we've ever also had a president try to do this before. It is a novel situation where
Well, I mean,
somebody
we-
has resisted the peaceful transfer of power this clearly in so many different ways.
Well, if you're talking about the legal cases, then, I mean, that's not true. But Gore sued in 2000. Right? I mean, so
It's not the same
like,
thing
we're
at
talking about legal
all.
cases,
Comparable
right?
to Gore. If this was comparable to Gore,
I'm
then
not saying it's comparable to Gore. I'm saying that if the idea is that espousing a legal theory in court amounts to de facto some
It's not the
form
argument.
of election
Gore-
denial or interference in some way, that's not, as a general principle, it's over inclusive.
Sure. Gore wasn't trying to decertify the vote, though, for states, right? They challenged their thing to the Supreme Court. They lost their case in the Supreme Court, and then power transfer happened.
Right.
after.
And Donald Trump had a bunch of legal challenges, and then he had a rally, and then there was a riot, and then he left power.
Yeah, but the Eastman theory of what Pence could do in Congress is a far cry
A
away.
truly
from-
shitty theory. I mean, make no mistake. It's a
but not
really
just
shitty theory.
shitty. I think that if any Democrat had done this, I feel like we'd be looking at it in a far different lens. As in, we would be using terms like attempted coup, subversion, or peaceful transfer of power. If a Democrat vice president had tried to essentially say that in Congress they could throw away the vote.
So I think what I want to get to here, actually, so we can be more specific,
Sure.
is why are these terms important? We agree on, largely speaking, what happened.
Mhm.
I think the characterization of the term, we keep kind of bouncing around between two
Sure.
different categories, and I want to make sure we chat. Are we? Are,
Well, the terms matter because of what they're describing. To try to compare it to Al Gore is insane. With what happened with Al Gore is like a legitimately complicated and interesting situation. Popular vote was won by him, but the electoral vote was not. And then people had legitimate complaints about how the voting was done in Florida. People said they were confused and all that. So there's like reason, there's like tangible, visible evidence here. Say like maybe something happened that could have actually like gone wrong here, and the we might actually have to do something about this. There's good reason to think that like democracy isn't being upheld in the kind of way. There's a standard in which we want people to have confidence in their vote, and we're not meeting this. We're not like rising to the level that we think that we should. So this is like a pretty interesting case. But with what Trump did, this is just literally just trying to fight against what happened. The voting was done. He didn't like the votes, and then he did everything he could to try to fight against it, despite everybody telling him like, "No, you're wrong." Every time I hear somebody bring up this argument that that they're even remotely comparable is absolutely obnoxious and absurd to me.
Legal stuff.
It's just people kicking and screaming, say like, "I don't want to be wrong." That's all
so
that is to
we
me.
keep kind of bouncing around between
Sure.
two different categories,
We
and I
can
want to make
dump-
sure we
we can
chat.
dump
Are we?
the legal stuff.
Okay,
actually,
okay,
because
so we're just
not
talking-
looking
fine.
at incite because, like
Fine,
you said, Jack
fine.
Smith, nobody's charging with incitement,
Right.
and I don't believe insurrection is a part of it. So we're dumping legal. I just in terms of like
Oh yeah, and also nothing like this happened as a
a
result.
president that is trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. So whether you call that a bloodless coup or a coup or whatever contemporaneous term you want to use.
Right. So prevent the peaceful transfer of power
Yes.
with all means, or using means that are inappropriate. Not quite the same thing.
Using
Meaning
means that
means
are
that-
inappropriate or illegal.
Okay. Inappropriate. Okay. So illegal. I don't think so. I don't think that these charges actually meet the criteria for the various charges, and we can discuss each case if you want.
Sure.
As far as inappropriate,
Mhm.
sure. I think tons of inappropriate stuff. I mean, inappropriate seems
The reason why I don't
not-
like the word inappropriate, though, is because then conservatives are very quick to say, well, sure, he was inappropriate, but everybody was inappropriate.
I mean, I'll concede that he's more inappropriate than others. I just
Okay.
don't see
The
that
most
as-
inappropriate.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
That's important to me, though. Does it not bother you that, like, Donald Trump sought through legal and extra legal and Trump magical ways of trying to entrench his power as president past when he should have been able to? Is that not something that is incredibly troublesome?
I mean, the question to me is the bigger question that I think the Democrats are trying to promote in this election cycle, which is this means he is a threat to democracy sufficient that if he were to win the election, there would not be another.
Is
He
that
is
not?
such
But
a-
he
and my
tried
answer
to
to
do that
that is-
last time. Could he not try to next time?
And I mean, he could try to do whatever he wants, presumably, and he would fail the same way that he did last time
Why do we think that?
because he
Ye-
failed.
Yeah.
Because so if you
Because there
fail
was a
once, it
riot,
could
and
never
within 3
succeed.
hours, yes.
Like, let's say hypothetically, Lord, save me. Let's say
Destiny's appropriate and being a bit condescending here. That this is Ben Shapiro's been extremely strong throughout this entire thing. This is a dog shit argument. This is it's actually fucking crazy to me that he would suggest this. Super wild. I couldn't imagine. Why he would think to make this argument. Like I don't think he believes it. So I'm just like at a loss as to why he thought it was appropriate to make that
Yeah,
argument at all.
hypothetically, Giuliani was the next head of the Department of Justice. Giuliani was the next Attorney General.
How would he be confirmed?
I'm not entirely sure if because so much of the Republican Party, despite feeling like they don't support Trump when it comes time to actually back him in Congress.
Also, I would have to check
um,
whether he would be barred by criminal conviction from holding. I don't know the answer to that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. We're this, especially with the 14th Amendment, we're figuring out a lot
Right.
of this right now. Yeah. But I mean, like, say if not Giuliani, say if there are any other number of insane people that Trump could theoretically put on his side of the government that wouldn't tell him no next time, because there were a lot of people that rebuked him. There were Republicans in a lot of the states, right? Raffensperger is one of them. There were Republicans in his own administration. You've got Rosen. You've
Right.
got Barr. There was his own vice president. But like theoretically, next time, and I feel like last time going in, I'm going to do a little bit of mind reading at macro. Maybe you agree, maybe disagree. I think that Trump kind of thought, one, I don't think Trump knows much at all about how the government works. I think we probably agree with that. I think Trump probably thought that if he had people that were like at least in his party and kind of camp, that they'll basically do whatever needs to be done to give him what he wants, and with no respect for process. But now that he sees that, well, it's not enough to just have allies. I need people that are fiercely allegiant to me. Would we not be worried that a guy that tried to essentially steal the election for real wouldn't try to pick people that would be more amenable to his plans in the next administration?
I believe in the checks and balances of American government. I believe they worked on January 6th. So if you're asking me, do I think that Trump has bad intent or could have bad intent with that sort of stuff? Sure. Do I believe that the guardrails held and will continue to hold? Also, sure.
So if somebody was running and they blatantly said, like, I don't want to use the fascist word, but if they said, like, I want to be an authoritarian, I'm going to abolish all elections, you would say, sure, he's saying that, but like, I don't think he can actually do it. So it's okay if he runs for president. You don't care at all as long as you feel like the guardrails.
I mean,
are
I
there
might
to prevent.
prefer other candidates, but I think that also one of the things that you do is that politicians, again, this would be an exceptional circumstance, but politicians constantly make promises about the things that they are going to do and then don't fulfill. And we tend to take those out in the wash, meaning that, if I promise that day one, as Donald Trump has pledged to do, that he's going to deport literally every illegal immigrant to the country, do I think he's actually going to do that? I mean, I really highly doubt it. He didn't do it last time he was in office. That's just, there are many examples of this.
I agree.
Do I think, here's my question. Do you think the guardrails are going to fail to hold?
I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah, because I think the issue is one, when it's election time, Republicans are spineless in office, and I don't know how many congressmen would support what he wants just because they want to win re-election or because they think it's inevitable anyway.
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that happened in 2022 is Democrats ran directly on this platform, and a bunch of Republicans lost who were running on this platform. Literally every Secretary of State who ran on the Donald Trump.
Oh shoot, I muted myself because I was coughing. I said, no, he's subscribed to my channel. I'm sure it popped up on his phone like everybody else who's subbed, and he's seen that it was the debate, so he popped in. I don't think that he was just like searching hardcore. That's how it works when you're sub to somebody's YouTube
platform. Lost in every state.
Sure, but other Republicans that have been
office is this.
Sure, but I mean, like, look at what happened with like Kinzinger and Cheney, right? Who were very like staunchly anti-Trump after J6 for that select committee, right? Kinzinger didn't even run again, and Cheney lost her election by I think the widest margin that anybody has ever lost an election ever in like all of U.S. politics.
People who were not yet born voted against.
Yeah,
it, yes.
I guess it's a surprising position to me for if we're looking at like principled stances of government. The idea that a man who has, and I think we both agree on this, that Donald Trump's only allegiance is to Donald Trump. right? We agree on that. The only thing he cares about is Donald
I
Trump.
don't think it's the only thing you care about. I think it's certainly the largest thing you
It's
care
the
about.
largest thing he cares about, right? So if you've got a man who only cares about himself, and
Welcome
not
to
even-
politics. I mean, it may be more,
But that's not
it
even.
may be more with Trump, but it's certainly not unique
But
to Trump.
I think that the issue with Trump too, though, is I think he's even a threat to the Republican Party, in which I think you would mostly agree with me. Maybe not overall, but on every individual point, Trump picks bad candidates. He has no concern for the future of the Republican Party. Like, for instance, I think there is a chance. I don't think it'll happen because of how the polling looks now. But if Trump didn't get the nomination, I think Trump would say screw it and run as an independent because he thinks he can win or whatever, right?
I doubt that he would do that, but theoretically,
Possible,
he could.
yeah.
I mean, again,
Trump he would.
I think he would because he's looking for presidency to save him from criminal conviction.
Is really content to throw Georgia, the 2 runoff elections
Okay.
under the bus because Raffensperger
Is-
didn't support him for
I
the
mean,
election
so
stuff. Like,
what is all of this in service of? What's the generalized argument that you're making? Do you believe? I'll go
Well,
back to my
yeah, sure, the
question. Do you
generalized-
think
the
that
two
if Trump wins,
Mhm.
there will be no more elections? Is that like what
I
put a
don't know
percentage
if-
on it? What percentage do you think that's a reality? that if Donald Trump becomes
wins,
president,
I think there is a 100% chance that he will try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah.
In terms of would he succeed?
I can guarantee you he will not do that
Why is that?
because he's in his second term and he's no longer eligible, and he will believe he won and he will leave.
Yeah, but hasn't Donald Trump himself joked about running for a 3rd term?
that's
I think that
that-
having a 3rd term.
what has Donald Trump not joked about? I mean, for God's
I don't.
sake.
Okay, hold on.
If
Well,
you want
This is-
to prevent him from creating a revolution, you probably should
Sure.
actually just appoint him president, and then he can't run again.
Here's
So.
another broad.
No, look. When he makes jokes about it and he's actually done what he's done, this becomes a much more realistic argument. It's not like it's not the same as if he if you were to make the same point about Obama, then you can see it just seems like it's a joke. There's no reason to think that he could actually do that. But Trump actually did try to subvert the democratic process before. This isn't just there's a reason why it matters when Trump says it. This is
An argument that I don't like in favor of Trump, and this was brought up earlier in terms
Shapiro's
of
just
like
not taking
we
it
talk about
seriously.
not grading presidents on a curve, but then earlier we said we take Biden's rhetoric.
Oh no,
more
I totally
seriously than
grade Trump.
Trump's.
No, I 100% grade presidents on a curve. Are you kidding?
Oh, okay.
I grade pretty much everybody on a curve.
Well, then I feel like
I don't treat my 7-year-old
I
the
feel
same way
like-
that I treat my 9-year-old.
Sure, but
And I
I
don't treat
don't.
Trump
I
the same
don't
way I
like
treat
that.
Obama.
It feels like we're treating Donald Trump like a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. I think we should treat him like the president of the United States. I don't think having a president that has taken concrete steps to prevent the transfer of power, which he did with the electorate's sham, which he did with Pence, and which he did with trying to capitalize on the J6 violence, a president that's taken concrete steps towards cooing the government, essentially. I don't know why that guy we'd say, well, it's Trump, he does Trump things. The guardrails held. I'll probably hold next
So
time.
I mean,
let's throw him in.
when we say we shouldn't, do you mean that he should be actually barred from office?
I'm just talking about support for him. I don't even think Republicans should support Trump. You lose your incumbent advantage. The guy's obviously self-destructive. He's destructive to the political party itself.
Do you think he should be on the ballot? You think there's a case to be made to remove him from the ballot?
Yes.
I think there's a case to be made, but man, the phrasing, for as much as our governmental founding fathers and everybody else, wrote nice amendments and wrote nice in the Constitution, some of the phrasing is very, very, very bleh. And the Section 3, the not requiring any type of actual conviction, I don't have a strong feeling on it. I will say I'm very interested in reading the majority opinion from the Supreme Court. I seriously doubt the Supreme Court is going to uphold that states should be able to decide if they leave him off the ballot or not. I think for the political
think
future
so
of the
too.
United States, it's probably not healthy that the leading opposition candidate is now going to be barred from the ballot. It's probably not healthy for us. Because then what?
You want to talk about threats to democracy? That would be a pretty serious one, applied across
would,
the board. By the way,
it would be. However, that threat to democracy was earned by Donald Trump and the conservatives that supported him. I think conservatives made a dangerous gamble when they threw Trump into office, and now all of the fallout from that is something that we all as Americans have to deal with.
I mean, I think that the unprecedented legal theory that a state can simply bar somebody from the ballot on the basis of, in an informal way, believing that he is "quote unquote" an insurrectionist is pretty wild. I mean, that
We can say it's pretty well, but there is an amendment in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, that says that if they have engaged in this, they shall not be, or you shall, I don't remember the phrasing because it doesn't require conviction, but it's a self-executing, arguably thing.
If we're getting into constitutional law, I mean, there are a number of provisions that suggest that this is, number one, not self-executing. I mean, minority opinions in the Colorado Supreme Court case are pretty thorough. The number one contention, which is that this is not self-executing because other elements are not self-executing, that ignores subsequent actual law that happened. I mean, the Congress passed a law, for example, in 1872 defining who was an insurrectionist, who was not an insurrectionist for purposes of elections. In 1994, Congress passed a law that specifically defined insurrection as a criminal activity so that somebody could theoretically be convicted of insurrection and therefore ineligible to run for office. It is unlike, say, the analogs that are used by the majority opinion, like age. Obviously, this is not the same thing. We can all tell what somebody's age is by looking at their birth certificate. I can't tell whether somebody's an insurrectionist without any reference to a legal statute or a definition of the term.
I would also be careful with that because remember, one of Trump's first like big political actions was challenging Obama's birth certificate.
Well, and I thought that was dumb at the time. But
Sure.
in any case,
I like that you both said 100% chance that Trump will try to go for third term and 0% chance, which
third
statistically.
term, he's done, man.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
He would want to. Given the-
Trump's going to
that
walk
try.
around, hands up high. He's going to be like, I'm a 2-term president. I'm the only president since Grover Cleveland who would know. But since Grover Cleveland, who served 2 non-consecutive terms, I kicked Joe Biden out of office and I kicked Hillary Clinton out of office. Dude would be like, he'd be living large. Are you kidding? He doesn't want the presidency anymore after that.
I just think that I think it's scary that like Donald Trump.
I think Donald
it
Trump
feels-
wants the presidency as long as he needs it to shield himself from litigation. It's like, come on. Until he has no criminal charges on him, I think that's all he cares about at this point.
It's like for all of the accusations that are made sometimes against Democrats, like Biden is ordering Garland to investigate Donald Trump and blah, blah, blah. It seems like Donald Trump would actually do that with his DOJ, would give them orders.
He didn't. He didn't.
Well,
He didn't do it with his DOJ.
kind of did though, right? So for instance, with Jeffrey Clark went to Rosen and Donahue and said, hey, listen, I need you guys to sign off on a letter that we're going to use essentially to bully states into overturning their elections by saying we found significant election fraud. And part of that threat was Jeffrey Clark saying, listen, if you're not going to do it, Rosen, Trump's going to fire you and just make me the acting attorney general. That was the threat that he carried. And I think Trump repeated that threat in a meeting later on that was, I only rebuked when I think like half the White House staff said, if you do this, we're resigning.
Okay, so that's a slightly different topic because now you're getting into all the election shenanigans and all this. But
Sure, I'm just saying he threatened to fire his acting
Shenanigans.
attorney general if he wouldn't carry the same platform. Essentially, like if Trump could order his DOJ to do something, would he? It's not beyond the pale for him, right?
it's not beyond the pale for him to order them to do it, and then it's not beyond the pale for them to reject him doing that, which is the story of his entire administration. Whereas Joe
I
Biden
agree.
orders his DOJ to do things, and then they just do them.
Well, I'm not. We can get into specifics there. I
Do
just
it.
it
This is one of the
Get
big
into
problems
specifics,
that I
come
have
on.
with, I mean, for example, all the talk about Trump tyrant, Trump executive power. I mean, Joe Biden has used executive power in ways that far outstrip
every
anything that Donald
president
Trump-
has been stretching and stretching and stretching executive power.
I mean,
That's
Joe,
just
Joe
been-
Biden is going.
That's
like,
true.
Joe Biden has gone well beyond anything Trump even remotely attempted to maintain via just pure executive power. And actually, Trump's use of executive power is nowhere near even what Obama's was.
I mean,
Obama used
Trump's
executive power in a
inability
big
to
way.
get border policy passed literally had him using executive power to march the military down to the border to do border policy. I mean,
I mean, Joe Biden literally used.
I actually think that's a bad argument. If anything, executive power should be used for, it's probably to probably pertains to things directly incorporating military action. There's probably more. I think it's a bad argument. Still, say that he should have been able to do that, but it's probably more of an argument there than the other examples that might come up.
Use the
Against Biden
Occupational
or
Safety and
Obama.
Hazard Administration to try to cram down vax mandates on 80 million Americans. That's insane.
sure.
He
but
literally
why- but
said,
why
I cannot
give-
relieve student loan debt, and then tried to relieve hundreds of billions of dollars in
Yeah,
student
but what
loan
happened
debt.
to that?
It got struck down by the Supreme Court, and then they still did it. They still did it. Biden brags about it.
For
brags about having relieved
what he
tens of
was
billions.
able to relieve, which I think were related to particular types of student loan debt. But I'm just saying that the guardrails are holding with Biden as much as they're holding with Trump. The only difference is that once Biden exhausts his executive power, he's not running around lying to people or trying to extort people or trying to and concoct insane schemes.
Well, I mean, so here's the way I would think of this. Think of the guardrails holding as the filter.
Sure.
Okay, meaning like the coffee is in the filter. Some of it's what you want is going to get through, and all the stuff. The guardrails prevent the other stuff from getting through.
Mhm.
Now the question becomes, what liquid are you pouring into the filter? Okay, meaning so if the filter exists, if the guardrails hold, and if Donald Trump can't steal elections, what's the policy that comes through the other end of the filter? The policy I get from Donald Trump on the other end of the filter is a bunch of stuff that I like. The policy that I get from Joe Biden on the other end of the filter is a bunch of bullshit I don't. So that's the basic calculation.
Okay, so then the idea is essentially that
That seems so short-term thinking. Well, I guess if he's dismissed all of Destiny's concerns about Trump trying to subvert democratic process in the future, I guess it makes sense. But I don't believe him. I wish Destiny would have really went harder on him against that.
Donald Trump's rhetoric is insane, but we don't care. Donald Trump would probably try to steal an election if he could, but he probably won't be able to.
He's not going to do it again. I told you. He's not.
You don't think he has any? Why not?
Because he won't be eligible to be on the ballot in. I mean, by the way, you want to talk about 14th Amendment?
Mhm.
That's where the 14th Amendment applies. Okay, that's where it actually applies. Meaning you cannot. he is not qualified to be on the ballot in 2028 if he is the president of the United States. States can literally, in self-executing fashion, take him off the ballot, just like he's past the age of 35. Once you have been president 2 times, you're no longer eligible to be president of the United States. Then you
why do
actually
you
have
think,
a strong little
yeah,
case
but
to
like,
keep him off the ballot.
why would the 14th Amendment stop him if he thought Vice President Pence could unilaterally decide the outcome of the election?
When he's not on the ballot? So now your theory is that he's going to get reelected, and then in 2028 he's not even going to be on the ballot, and he's going to direct his new vice president Kerry Lake to simply declare him president of the United States when he has not been on a ballot.
I don't know what the scheme would be. I think we can kind of like laugh and say there's no scheme we could even concoct. But I think
Macho
that
Camacho, like with the machine gun, he's going to walk in.
I think the issue though is that like
why couldn't you just make an executive order saying that a president could be reelected after that? Or also, what is it? Isn't it that there's a provision that a president doesn't have to give up their seat? Under what circumstances can a president stay in office? I'm pretty sure that there's a way that a president doesn't have to give up their seat if it says if there's like martial law or something. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Like the
I'm pretty
idea
sure,
of
though. I'm
electing
pretty
another
sure.
president that has tried to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power using extra legal means, and then pretending like we can't concoct a single scheme that he could try to circumvent other legal processes to have a third term or to have a longer term or to install who he wants as the next president. I just when a person has already shown you who they are, and when every single person around him agrees with that, when every single person that's worked with him, save for Sidney Powell, Eastman, and Giuliani, which I don't think anybody would want to throw their lot in with those three. It just seems wild to me that we would say like, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and trust this guy with another term of president, but like he can't run for a third term, so it's fine. When there's like 50 million other things.
And I'll make you the case that if you want him not to make election trouble, you should elect him president in the next election cycle, and then he will be ineligible.
Okay. Well, I find that to be a wholly unconvincing argument. But okay.
Well, recently in the news, the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and MIT.
Well, just to be clear, Destiny's bringing up a pretty legitimate criticism. I think it's actually socially irresponsible for Ben to laugh that away, because if that happens, like this has like deep running permanent implications for the entire world. The United States becomes a different thing. I think it's not the kind of thing to be taken lightly at all. So it's kind of a bummer to see somebody who's as prominent as Ben Shapiro literally just laugh it off. Because I don't hate Ben Shapiro. I think that he's, I mean, at least insofar as what he does, pretty respectable. But he probably needs he should be taking the idea of the United States, like dissenting into authoritarian rule like that a bit more serious, because like it is. There's a non-zero chance that something like that happens. Now we're in a new reality where this is like actually like a possibility.
Failed to fully denounce calls for genocide, and that rose questions about the influence of DEI programs at universities. And so maybe either looking at this or zooming out more broadly at identity politics at universities or identity politics, wokeism in our culture. How big of a threat is it to our culture, to Western civilization? Ben?
So obviously I'm going to say it's a huge threat. The reason that I think this is a huge threat, I want to give a definition of wokeism because people are very often accused of not using wokeism properly or believing that it's sort of a catch-all phrase. I don't think it's a catch-all term. I think that wokeism has its roots in postmodernism, which essentially suggests that every principle is a reflection of underlying structures of power, and that therefore any inequality that emerges under such a system is a reflection, again, of that structure of power that used to be applied in sort of Marxist ways, the suggestion being that economic inequality was the result of misallocation of power in the structure preserved by an upper crust of people who wanted to cram down exploitation on people. That was sort of the Marxist version of postmodernism. And then it got transmuted into sort of a racial version of postmodernism, in which the systems of the United States are white supremacist in orientation and are perpetuated by a group of people who are, in fact, in favor of the preservation of white power and white supremacy. That is the generalized theory of critical race theory, as proposed by, for example, Gene Stefanchik and Richard Delgado in their book on critical race theory. That has taken a softer form that we refer to as DEI. The key in DEI is the E, meaning equity. So equity is a term that does not mean equality. People mix it up. Equality is the idea that we all ought to have equal rights, that we all ought to be treated equally by the law. Equity is the idea that if there is an inequality that emerges from any system, it is therefore due to discrimination. And the best way to tell whether somebody has been victimized is by dint of their race. And we can tell whether you're a member of an oppressed group or an oppressor group by the intersectional identity that you carry and by the nature of your group's success or failure predominantly along economic and power lines in American life. This means that if one group is predominantly successful economically, they must be a member of the victimizing class. And the only corrective for that would be, as Ibram X. Kendi likes to suggest, effectively anti-racist policy is racism in the service of destroying racism. That you're going to have to discriminate on the basis of race in order to correct for discrimination that's baked into the system. That's incredibly dangerous. It leads to a victim-victimizer narrative that is unhealthy for individuals and terrible for societies. It relieves people of individual responsibility, and it destroys the very notion of an objective metric by which we can decide meritocracy. And meritocracy is the only system human beings have ever devised that has positive externalities in literally any area of life. Every other distribution of wealth, power, done along other lines that is not having to do with merit has negative externalities. Every system having to do with merit has positive externalities because presumably the most effective and useful people are going to succeed under those systems. That's the very basis of a meritocracy. And the externalities of that mean that other people benefit from the meritorious and excellent performance of those people.
Maybe it would be good to get your comments, your old stomping ground, Harvard. Do you think the president of Harvard should have been fired?
I mean, I think she should have been fired not over the plagiarism allegations. I think she should have been fired based on her performance just at that congressional hearing. If the word black had been substituted for Jew in that statement by Elise Stefanik that she was asking about, or trans, or literally any other minority in America, maybe with the exception of Asian, then the answer would have been very different coming from Cloudy and Gay. With that said, I don't think the firing of Cloudy and Gay really accomplishes very much. Meaning, did she get what she deserved? Sure. Does that mean that the underlying DEI equity-based system has been in any way severely damaged? No, I think that this is a way for universities, it's true for Liz McGill at Penn also, to basically throw somebody overboard as the sacrifice to maintain the underlying system that continues to predominate at American universities, where they spend literally billions of dollars every year on DEI initiatives and diversity hires and diversity administrators and all of this. I mean, one of the costs of education escalating is in the massive administrative
Well, it does say not a cult
function that is now undertaken by universities, as opposed to teaching and
That's really
cost
funny.
of dorms and such.
You guys probably agree on a lot of this, right?
Kind of,
I
maybe,
agree.
yeah.
Most of it.
I don't know. I don't know what makes things do this, but it feels like we can never like have a good thing and then have it end as a good thing. Things always get taken to their extreme, and then we have to fight on those extremes. Like, I would argue that back in my day, we called it SJW, Social Justice Warriors, before it became woke. I think it's like 2013 onwards, whatever. Like, there are aspects to wokeism that I think are good. Like, I like the additional representation that we have in media now. I like how, as much as people complain about the internet and how it's regulated, that there are way more groups that are represented on the internet, whether we're talking X, the platform formerly known as Twitter or Facebook or whatever.
People don't need to stop doing this. I'll call it X when he changes the URL. If he doesn't have the balls to change the URL to x.com, it's still Twitter.
I think in some ways, or whether we're pushing, like women's achievements in school and in the wider workforce, I think that these are all good things. The issue that you run into is people don't ever have a stopping point, and I think people kind of get lost in this woke for woke's sake thing, where we start to see these very weird warpings of these like academic I guess, arguments that are used for really horrible things. So, for instance, I think that you can talk about in the United States things like white supremacy or things like oppression of certain demographics, especially with like Jim Crow laws and pre-Jim Crow. And you can even talk about effects from that. But then when you run into this weird world where we've kind of warped these things so that like not only is white supremacy still as present today as it ever has been, well, actually, black people and other minorities can't even be racist. They don't have the power to because we're going to use a different definition of
That's obviously
racism,
crazy.
and we can only talk about punching up as opposed to punching down. And we're actually going to say it's totally okay for these people to say or do whatever they want, and it's never bad. But like white people who have always been the oppressors, even if you're like a trailer park guy whose family's addicted to meth, you know, you have all this privilege, et cetera, et cetera. I think that you run into these issues where wokeism, it starts off as like a really good idea, and I would argue has achieved really good things, especially in regards to like women's education and everything. And then it just gets so academia-ized. So there's a word there, academic, whatever, where you take something and you put it into school too much and then it comes out as some Frankenstein, you know, cancer baby of like horrible things, such that today when I'm reading stuff, and I know Ben is the same way, like if I even hear somebody say the word like anti-racism, I'm probably ignoring every other thing you have to say. If you utter the word like colonial,
Um, Unfortunately, I have to wrap it here. My wife has to go to bed, and she had a super long day. Under any normal circumstances, I just finished this and probably even stream a little bit longer. My wife has had an exceptionally tough day, so I want to make sure that she's not going to bed by herself, and that she gets to see me for a little bit. She also walked out in the cold to get us dinner, and I'm very appreciative of that, and I don't want to show my appreciation by um, having her like ignored after going and walking for the dinner, making dinner and all that. So I'm gonna finish this up tomorrow. Sorry, I'm super interested in this, even though it's not the kind of Destiny debate that I think anybody really envisioned. It's still interesting. Um, I'm surprised that he didn't get nearly as much as he by all metrics, my understanding, he should have gotten on the January 6th part. Honestly, think that like in every part of this is a much weaker showing than I expected from Destiny. Uh, I don't know if it's like what I originally thought, that he's just trying to be more optically better because he's in front of a much larger audience. But I think he probably could have used I think he'd have been a lot better off having some of that like aggressive flavor that he has in all of his debates that we see when he's on Kicker YouTube streaming. Um, Ben was a lot more aggressive in the beginning, and he like kind of cooled down to match Destiny's energy. I don't know if that's part of the strategy, but I think being high energy and more aggressive certainly is more suiting for Destiny than it would be for Ben Shapiro, and it certainly would have made for a much more entertaining debate. But there really isn't a whole lot. There's only like 25 minutes left for like that to change, so I don't expect it to change. Um, oh no. Well, this part's gonna be really interesting. I didn't know that they debated monogamy versus open relationships. So I'm pretty excited to see that. But I guess that's what I'll open with tomorrow night, unfortunately. Uh I found out about this later than I wish I would have. Um but that doesn't mean I regret talking to the big JC first. He's always fun to talk to. So tomorrow's Thursday. I'll probably stream a little bit earlier than normal, probably like around 6 o'clock. Don't hold me to it though. I'll still announce it in Discord. If you're in the Discord and you don't have the tag and you want the tag to get notifications before I go live, just tag me in the Discord and I'll give you that. Yeah, that's it for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow.